Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Chapter 41, Omega Beta Alpha. Perhaps it had been because of how tired Gary had been throughout Friday, or it might have had something to do with him having gone to sleep before midnight when he would get new notification, but this morning he woke up well rested. The absence of the annoying alarm that usually woke him up long before his sister Amy certainly also had a part to play in that. Stretching, Gary checked his status, already expecting to see some changes. Unsurprisingly, his daily quests had once again refreshed, but there was also a new notification waiting for him. Your bloodlust grows. 10 days until the next full moon. Unlike yesterday, there were no mentions of any additional stats, due to it being closer to the full moon though. After looking at his phone, he realized that it was already 11 a.m., meaning that he only had 1 hour before meeting up with Tom. Holy crap, I slept in this late. Gary cursed internally, getting dressed as quickly as possible before leaving the apartment. 30 seconds later, he returned, making sure to bring along Kai's phone as well this time. Heading to the town center where the library was located, Gary decided to run there. This method didn't use up any money, and he found it to be a good way to check whether he might actually increase his energy bar this way. Energy and health were both stats under the werewolf system, so if he could naturally improve strength and endurance, why not those two? It was at least worth a shot, although it was mostly about saving money. The library was a 3-story building and had been built at the edge of the shopping street, at the end of all the shops. It was primarily used by university students who actually had a hopeful future ahead of them. It was one of the few safe areas of town where the police regularly patrolled, which was why gangs left it untouched. The gangs, in the first place, during the day, didn't interfere much with the general business that would operate in the high street. Gary's powerful eyesight allowed him to see Tom already waiting for him, but from a distance he could also see that something was wrong with his friend. Slowing down his stride, his happy face quickly turned sour. "What happened to you?" Gary asked. Tom put on a smile and touched his swollen and cut eye. Man, I was watching one of Kirk's altered fights, and then as I went out of my room, I wanted to try out his tornado kick. Stupid me, I fell down the stairs and banged up my eye on the banister pretty badly. Although a fall down the stairs might explain some of it, Tom also had other markings on his body. Ignoring Tom's dislike for most physical activities, falling down the stairs was pretty much the textbook answer someone gave when trying to hide something. Could it be trouble at home? No, his parents aren't like that. They treasure their golden boy too much to hurt him. Gary thought. He knew that something was up, but Tom's behavior made it clear he didn't exactly want to talk about it. Given how many secrets of his own Gary was keeping from his best friend, he didn't feel it was right for him to push him on the matter. "So what move was it again?" Gary asked, pretending to accept the explanation he had been presented, as they both entered the library together. As with any library, it was very quiet, so they kept their mouths shut until reaching the 3rd floor where they could access the public computers. Tom searched up all the relevant books in the library that they might need. Using the internet, he just looked up the pages and information they actually needed. Tom was reading through them all and writing down notes that Gary didn't quite understand. So for now, he was just being used as a delivery boy. Whenever Tom would find a book they thought that could be of use, Gary would be asked to go get it, constantly going back and forth between, until finally, clicking his fingers and rubbing his good eye, Tom was satisfied with the research he had done. "All right, I believe I have learned everything there is to know about Alpha, Beta, and Omega wolves," Tom claimed, folding his arms proud. "Let's start with what applies with actual wolves. According to the lore I found, it should more or less coincide. Still, take all of this information with a pinch of salt." Tom flipped the notepad he had brought with him and opened a blank page. He then pulled out a marker pen and wrote the word Alpha. While explaining, he would write out the points and explain everything to Gary. Wolves are creatures that often hunt in packs, so every pack has their leader. These are the so-called alphas. A wolf pack usually has an alpha male and his alpha partner. These two could be seen as the family leaders. Beta wolves are pretty much wolves that are under the alpha. They could be their siblings, their children, or even outsiders. However, they all belong to a pack, following the alpha or alphas. Are you following so far? Tom asked, and Gary nodded. Okay, I get those too. But if an alpha is like the leader of a gang and the betas are like his henchmen and subordinates, then what exactly is an omega? Gary asked. His optional quest told Gary to turn an omega wolf into a beta, but this was where his confusion was setting in. Assuming he himself was the alpha wolf, was it referring to his siblings like Amy, or maybe his mother was the alpha wolf and he and his sisters were considered betas? This is where things get a little interesting. Tom answered, flipping his notebook to a blank page once again. An omega wolf is usually an outsider to a family or someone belonging to no family. Either way, they're usually at the bottom of the hierarchy. Essentially, after everyone else has gotten their food, the omega has to eat whatever is left. So far, if Gary was being classified as werewolf in these terms, he wasn't sure what he was. I know you were talking about wolves, but werewolves are part human, right? So how does this work? There are quite a few rules here, and it gets a bit complicated, but essentially a werewolf can turn another with a bite. Alpha wolves bite and turn those they wish to work under them, thereby creating beta wolves. Once turned, the beta wolves can also turn others, making them into other beta wolves that will have to listen to the alpha, to an extent I should add, but let's keep it simple for now. Hearing this, a shaking realization came to Gary's mind. A bite can turn someone, no, when the system message came up saying, I made an omega wolf. Images flashed in Gary's head to the time he had lost it slightly. At one point during his fight against Billy Buster, his sanity had left him and he had only wanted to win by all means. As he recalled, he had ended up biting the guy. Yesterday, the news reported Billy was on the run and his parents were dead. Don't tell me, was I responsible for this by fighting him? Is he really a werewolf now? Wait, you said that if an alpha bites someone, they would turn them into a beta, that they would have to follow them. So what about an omega? Gary asked, realizing that something was strange about the wording of the quest. As for an omega wolf, in most cases they seem to be wolves who have been kicked out of pack. However, that doesn't always have to be the case. For instance, they could also be the only surviving wolf of a group. In a way, you could say that alpha and beta wolves are just omega wolves who belong to a pack and have a hierarchy amongst themselves. If we take you for example, right now you would technically be a lone wolf at the moment, which would make you an omega wolf. I assume if you were to bite someone, it would make another omega wolf. If there are multiple omega wolves, I suppose that they would eventually try to form a pack. However, most likely they would battle it out to decide who amongst them would be the alpha, making the others submit. Gary was sure that Tom's guess was spot on, because judging by the quest, he was right. The system clearly stated that there was an omega wolf out there, and to start his family, he would have to make it accept being the beta wolf to his alpha. Until then, this also meant that at the moment, there was another werewolf in town, and in 10 days' time, there is practically guaranteed to be a bloodbath. After Tom was done with his explanation about alpha, beta, and omega wolves, he proceeded to go into detail about some other possibilities for what these words could mean. Unfortunately, Gary didn't really register anything past that point. After learning of what his future could possibly entail, things were going in one ear and out of the other as he was too busy to think what he should do about it. I was just starting to appreciate this system for letting me shine during rugby practice and allowing me to make money with Kai, but now it seems that this really is more of a curse rather than a blessing. Suddenly, the 10 days until the next full moon seemed to be a lot shorter than it had appeared this morning. In the first place, they weren't really sure what would happen. Maybe Gary would just get the biggest stat boost of his life on that day, but that was unlikely. He had already entertained the thought of either getting Tom to tie him up, so he couldn't do anyone any harm, or perhaps hiding that day somewhere where there shouldn't be any other people. However, knowing that there's another werewolf out, he had to do something about it, especially since he was the one at fault for that. So, assuming that Omega Wolf really is Billy, that should mean that just like me, he hasn't turned yet, right? Gary thought. But then why did he end up killing his parents? I haven't hurt anyone. At least, I don't think I did, apart from those 3 guys, perhaps. *T. Do all werewolves have to hurt people? If Billy really was that Omega Wolf, the high schooler had a different problem altogether. Billy was on the run, the prime suspect for killing his own parents. With the police not having any clue where he was, how was a 16-year-old supposed to find him? He looked through the system, hoping there might be some way to track the guy down, but so far, other than the red mist he could use to follow Barry because of their force bond, if there actually was a way, the system had yet to grant it to him. At that moment, Tom had finished explaining everything he needed to, unaware that his friend hadn't been listening at all, just nodding along. He stood up, intending to put some of the books away, when he felt a sharp pain on his side, causing him to almost drop the books. "The stairs?" Gary asked, taking the books off of him as he went to put them back. "Yeah, sorry, I'm not in the best of shape." Tom apologized. Being so concerned about his own problem, Gary had almost forgotten that Tom was in some type of tricky situation of his own. Since he had come to help him, despite his own situation, Gary wanted to return the favor. Unfortunately, this was harder than it sounded, since Tom refused to tell him exactly what his problem was. Well, those bruises definitely aren't self-inflicted. Did he run into another gang? Only this time, there was no mysterious stranger to help him, Gary thought, placing the books back and heading to his friend. "Tom, I'll be honest, I'm getting worried about this werewolf stuff. I have no idea what will happen to me when the full moon comes up, but I'm going to need someone to help me, and you're the only person who is really helping me. So I want you to promise me that the two of us will be friends no matter what happens. I also promise you that I won't eat you," Gary added, not realizing how hard it actually was to say out those words, since the possibility actually existed. He held out his hand, ready for a handshake, and although his words were quite cheesy in the sense for two people who were in high school, there was a reason for them. "Gary, are you on drugs or something?" Tom asked, nevertheless grabbing his hand. "We'll always be friends. Besides, I don't think we have to worry about it. Even if you do turn, my scrawny ass won't even be enough to be an appetizer. A spoken deal has been made. Would you like to mark Tom Green?" Once the two of them shook hands, the system gave Gary exactly the notification he had been hoping for. His bond mark skill triggered when he made a sincere promise to another party. It would allow him to track Tom at any point in time, which might tell him more about what exactly had happened to his friend. However, his skill had a very bad side effect. If Tom ended up breaking that promise, he would be assigned a broken mark, which would automatically turn him into a hunting target. So Gary had to make sure that the promise was something that neither one of them would ever break. He was also secretly hoping that it might have the additional effect of making Tom immune from becoming a hunting target for as long as he kept his promise. Yes, 2/5 marks had been assigned. After mentally agreeing to activate the skill, Gary saw a mark that looked similar to AM appear over Tom's head. His friend started giving off a new type of scent, which was similar, yet at the same time different to the one Barry had. Another thing that was different was the color of the mist that followed with the scent. Rather than red, this one was green. So unless one of the side effects of becoming a werewolf included belated red-green blindness, it should be impossible for Gary to get the two of them mixed up. After leaving the library, the two of them split ways once again. Tom asked if he wanted to meet up tomorrow to do anything, but Gary claimed that he already had other plans. The truth was, he didn't really want to leave the house more than necessary, in case any members of the underdogs or people who work for them were looking for him. Were it not mandatory, he might have even ditched school altogether until he figured out how to deal with Damien and his thugs. Still, Gary did go to the gym on his way home and the convenience store to continue doing his daily quest, as these were vital to improving his body and strengthening him. Name, Gary Dem. Level 4. EXP 225/460. Health, 100 out of 100. Energy, 110/110. Heart rate, 62 BPM. State, normal. Without any underground fights, no challenging school clubs, or hunting color gangs, his leveling had naturally stagnated. School was closed today, and going after the gangs again would be suicidal, until they would become less wary again, meaning he would just have to wait until Kai called him for his next fight. The rest of his Saturday proceeded as normal, to the point that Gary even went to bed at a reasonable time, simply because there was nothing else to do. Nevertheless, it took him a couple of hours until he finally fell asleep, due to everything on his mind and the decreasing number of days that were left. In the middle of the night, Gary woke up in sweat once again, pulling his bed sheets off him. He was covered in sweat and immediately looked to see if his sister was okay. Apparently, her sleep was so deep that she hadn't even noticed her older brother screaming right next to her. Your bloodlust grows. 9 days until the next full moon. Because of the messages he had received, he knew it was past midnight at least. Damn, I can't keep having these dreams. All this werewolf stuff is causing me to have the strangest of nightmares. Gary thought as he went to answer the call of nature. Before he made it to the toilet, however, he was distracted by a scent in the air. It was something he had never smelled before, and naturally he followed where his nose led him. Who could be cooking this late at night? Gary wondered. Strangely, the scent was close by, yet it wasn't coming from inside their apartment, but from their front door. Opening it, Gary could soon see what it was. Right there on the Dem's doorstep was what looked like a fresh piece of meat. The only thing was it still had blood around it, and it was lying there on the ground. Gary had seen quite a lot of raw meat recently, but never had he seen something like this before. His natural human brain was making him feel a little sick, but for some reason the smell it gave off made him hungry. The question was why? Soon the system had answered that question for him. Human flesh discovered. For a growing young werewolf, such as you, consuming human flesh is the best way to recover your energy, and who knows, it could make you stronger. If Gary hadn't felt sick before, he certainly did so now, having gotten confirmation in regards to what exactly that was in front of his door. He quickly turned away, fighting off his body's reaction to throw up, but he soon enough realized that it wasn't exactly going to get rid of the problem. It was getting hard to think for him, as the smell was so tantalizing he could feel the saliva already dripping down his chin. Gary went to pinch his nose, which actually helped him more than he had anticipated. Why the hell is there human flesh in front of my home? I can't even tell what part of the body that is. Gary thought, no, it might be for the best if I don't know. It seemed as if Gary had developed a real knack for keeping secrets away from his family, so he quickly closed the door, which further helped him regain sanity. Although not confirmed, all signs pointed that the piece of flesh had something to do with him. The good news was it was pitch black outside and after midnight, so it was unlikely that anyone would suddenly come out of their apartment door and find that piece of human flesh on their doorstep, which meant Gary had a little time to think about what to do with it. He was wondering just who could have done such a thing, and after racking his brain, he came to 3 conclusions. There's a chance that it might have been me. Maybe all those nightmares have made me go crazy, and, just like Billy, I ended up killing someone. It would certainly explain those weird dreams. Thinking about this more thoroughly, he came to the conclusion that it didn't seem to make sense. For one, his clothes had no blood on it, and at the same time, if he was turning into a werewolf or doing this subconsciously, his body would have eaten the flesh by now, not left it outside the door, as if to remind himself. The next suspect was the Underdogs gang. Perhaps they had found his address, and this was their warning to him, that if he didn't return the item, then they would do this to him. He had seen the Underdogs treat humans like dirt before, so he wouldn't put it past them, but that didn't really seem to make sense either. If they had already found out where he lived, why not just abduct and interrogate him? If not him, at least his mother or sister? No, this seemed to be too roundabout for them. That only leaves Billy. But why exactly did he leave that here? I thought he was supposed to have become a werewolf, not a house cat. Besides, if we're both Omega Wolves, why would he leave me a present? Then, could this be some sort of war declaration? Gary thought, OSH*T. What if this belongs to his parents? Now that he had a prime suspect, Gary still had to decide what to do with it. Of course, there was the method his system had indirectly suggested, but knowing that his was human flesh, he just couldn't bring himself to do it. Even if the system did say there was a chance of making him stronger, this was just inhumane. There were always other ways of improving his strength. On top of this, he was also afraid that it would leave behind blood as evidence. If this really was one of Billy's parents, and the police came over, Gary didn't want to continue that thought. He couldn't just throw it into the garbage either. If one of the neighbors found it, they might call the police. The last thing he wanted was to bring attention to himself, not only because evidence was all over their doorstep, but also because it might tip off the Underdogs. In the end, there was only one person who came to mind who might know how to handle such a delicate situation. Although he still didn't completely trust him, for some reason Gary had a feeling that he wouldn't disappoint him. Heading back inside quickly, Gary grabbed what he needed and then went outside once again. With the small phone in his hand, he had already hit send, pinging a message to the person who he believed could help him right now. Ding! Does that guy never sleep? No, I should thank God or whoever was responsible that he's still up. Jesus, what type of mess have you gotten yourself into? I'll leave you on your own for a couple of days, and you come back with this? All right, we'll talk more about this on Monday. So here's what you do. First off, with the underdogs chasing you, reporting it to the police or trying to get rid of the evidence yourself will only make it worse. So don't even think about it. For the time being, you might want to cover it up with something. I will make some calls, and in around 15 minutes, some people should come over and make sure that this thing disappears. They're professionals, so let them do what they need to do. Also, consider this a warning. For your own sake, don't let them see who you are. Stay inside and ignore them. Can't wait to hear your explanation for this one. Holding the phone and reading the messages, a wave of emotions overcame Gary. He couldn't believe that his problem would actually be solved with one simple text. It can't be that easy, can it? Gary pinched himself to make sure he wasn't still sleeping. Although he had been instructed to keep inside, Gary couldn't help but be curious as to how this problem would be solved and just what the big deal was. Eventually, though, around 10 minutes later, Gary heard a car pull up outside and the door slam shut. As soon as they started running up the stairs, he lost his nerve and shut the door waiting behind it, listening in to see if he could hear anything. Man, what I wouldn't give if we had a peephole right now. From the sound of their footsteps, there should be 3 of them. All right, let's get this cleaned up as soon as possible. One of the men whispered in a deep voice that sounded like it belonged to an adult. Gary could hear the sound of the men putting on scrubs before his nose started to notice the scent of chemicals. The high schooler was making sure to breathe as quietly as possible while the men worked. It didn't take them long to finish their work, and Gary could make out that they were starting to head down again. I might be able to see what they look like from my window. If I climb to the roof, my eyes should be able to still spot them. Gary decided, running to his room, but his plans got foiled. Gary, what the hell are you doing at this hour? Get back to bed, you idiot. His sister angrily snarled at him, as his running had actually managed to wake her. Sorry, Amy. Gary apologized. He couldn't climb out the window now, and by the time his sister would fall asleep, the men would be long gone. Still, it made him wonder just who the hell Kai was. How was a kid around his age able to solve a problem this easily? Gary knew that Kai knew people in the underdogs, and that his upperclassmen should still be a member of the underdogs. But just what position could he have if he could just call on those professionals? Perhaps more importantly, how could he not have panicked when Gary had admitted that there was what he assumed to be a piece of human flesh in front of his doorstep? Well, I doubt he'll tell me anything, even if I do ask him. If only he could solve my werewolf problems just as easily. Gary sighed, tensing his fist as he looked over to his little sister who had started to doze off. You damn Omega Wolf. You came right to my family's doorstep. I don't know how you did it, but that crosses the line. It looks like I'm going to have to deal with you before the full moon. After the types of days Gary was having, one would think that he would be having trouble sleeping. Yet for some reason, the closer it got to the full moon, the more his body craved sleep. No matter how much he worried, at some point he would basically just pass out. Still, when waking up Sunday noon, he hadn't forgotten about what had occurred in the middle of the night. Although Gary didn't exactly know what that piece of flesh in front of his house was supposed to mean to him, it was tantamount to a war declaration. The Omega Wolf knew where he and his family lived. This time he might have brought him a present, but who's to say that next time he won't turn Gary's family members into such a piece of meat? He had to find Billy and deal with him. Luckily, it was Sunday, giving Gary the whole day to at least find some clues on the others' whereabouts. During the week, it would be far more difficult. First things first, Gary checked every tab the werewolf system had, in case he might have missed anything. I can't find anything in this system that would help me. Maybe he unlocked another skill, or he managed to track my scent somehow. Gary thought in frustration after going through everything twice. However, The Omega Wolf had somehow been able to track where he was, so in theory Gary should be able to do the same. "I'm going over to meet Stacy. I'll be back by dinner," Amy shouted, and the door quickly closed behind her. Hearing this, Gary's heart started to beat faster. T. Billy was here at night. So could he have picked up Amy's scent? What if the human flesh was his message to me that he intended to go after my family? She said she would be back by dinner, and it's not too far to Stacy's. She's also traveling during the day. Billy hasn't been caught yet according to the news, so she should be okay. Should I just put a bond mark on her, just like I did Tom? But what the hell do I get her to promise me? Gary thought. With the system not helping him, Gary decided to text someone who had been a big help earlier, hoping that he might have any useful information. "Stop looking for trouble." Kai replied back almost immediately. You might feel responsible for him since he was Green Fong's debut opponent, but to Billy Buster, it was just another day. Heck, he lost against 3 other schmooks before you. One of them even beat him 3 times. If you go searching after the same guy the police are after, there's a good chance the underdogs will find you. Remember, they have eyes everywhere, and that includes in the police force as well. Alas, Kai proved to be far less helpful than he had been the previous time. Now that Gary took a moment to think about it, he realized that if Kai, or the underdogs for that matter, knew where he was, that Billy would have most likely already been apprehended. For the moment, he was the only one who actually knew that he was an Omega Wolf. With no better solution, Gary decided to turn on the TV in hopes there might be an update on the situation. It didn't take long for his wish to be granted. This morning, yet another murder victim has been found in an apartment in the area of Monte, and Chief of Police, Anton Milston, has shared more information about it. He confirmed that the modus operandi coincides with the murder of the Bruntons. Following the wishes of the late victim's family, his name will not be shared. So far, police have found no connection between the Bruntons and the dead high schooler. There has also been no news in regards to Billy Brunton's whereabouts, and according to Mr. Milston, they have to determine whether Billy is the prime suspect or just another victim. The news didn't look hopeful, and worst of all, Gary was wondering if Billy had killed again. The flesh from yesterday, was that this new person? That would explain why it looks so fresh. Why would he even kill a high schooler? Was it just an easy target, or was there more to it? Thinking about the flesh, Gary was also reminded about his system message that had appeared as he had looked over it. It had told him that there was the possibility he might grow stronger through consuming flesh. Since Billy was the first person he had turned, Gary had no idea what the rules were. Was he the only one who could grow stronger by eating others? Or was that something all werewolves shared that he himself created? Another reasonable question was whether it was a one-time thing, or if one grew stronger the more one ate of someone. The latter possibility was far scarier. For all he knew, Billy might have eaten nearly 3 entire human bodies. Billy had already been unnaturally strong for his age. The only reason why Gary had been able to match up to him was due to the werewolf system. Even if he hadn't gained a system of his own, it was at least safe to assume that he could transform. With that ability, as well as additional stats, would it even be possible for Gary to beat a supernatural Omega Wolf? Immediately, Gary started to prepare to leave the apartment himself. It's my fault that Billy keeps killing people. What's worse, he might just get stronger as the days go by. My best chance of stopping him is stopping him now. Quickly leaving the home, the high schooler headed to the address of Billy's home. It was a little far from Gary's as it was a different neighborhood, and it also looked like his next victim was in the same area. If only I could get into his room and find something that belonged to him. Given my keen nose, maybe I could just find him like a search dog. Wearing his usual hoodie to cover himself, Gary ended up going over the apartment block where the Bruntons used to live. The neighborhood was quite similar to Gary's. The streets were also filled with litter and graffiti, just in a different area. If Gary had to take a guess, Billy must not have exactly lived the best life either. Then again, if he had, he would have had no reason to fight underground. It was easy enough to spot where he lived, even without using his nose, because at the very moment, Gary could see heaps of reporters interviewing those that lived in the apartment complex. He peeked around the corner of the street down the road. Damn, so much for my plan. If I so much as try to go up to the apartment, then those reporters will definitely try to question me. I can't afford to show myself on TV. Sniffing the air, Gary tried to pick up any strange scents, but with all the people present, not to mention the sweats and food that was being sold by some entrepreneurs, it was impossible to do. Gary deemed it too risky to go into the apartment, so he would just have to find Billy another way. "Hey there, little buddy. Where are you in a rush to?" A male voice addressed him from behind. Gary looked up to see two adults blocking his way. He hadn't noticed them, yet now they directly stood in front of him in their white and gold clothing. "It looks to me like someone doesn't want to be seen. What's that famous saying? The criminal always returns to the scene of the crime?" The female commented. "Huh, I'm no criminal. I was merely curious." Gary answered in a panic, wondering just who these people were in the first place. He was getting ready to use Charging Heart and run away, even if it would make him look more suspicious to these strangers. "Now hold on." The woman grabbed onto Gary as if she had anticipated his next move. "If you got nothing to hide, then you should have no problem having a little chat with us. You might not be the murderer, but it looks like you might know a few things." Both of them pulled out their wallets at the same time, displaying a golden badge with the symbol of a white rose, with the acronym AIF on the top. Gary gulped. "Oh, brother, these guys are even worse than the police. Why didn't I listen to Kai's advice? How the hell did I manage to stumble into the Altered Investigation Force?" The Altered Investigation Force, more commonly referred to as White Rose, was one of the most well-known police forces. Gary had seen them mentioned multiple times on the news, and for more reasons than one, but the main reason why they stood out was due to their force being made up entirely of altereds. I might outrun a normal human, but I doubt it will work on an altered. If I try anything that might seem beyond what a human could do, they'll think I'm an altered person and will investigate how I became one. Gary thought. Sadie Nimper and Frank Hugh had both been watching the apartment building for a while now. They were currently supposed to be working on a different case. Earlier this week, in what they assumed to be a gang trade gone wrong, 3 bodies had been uncovered that appeared to have been killed by an altered. The reason why they were staking out Billy's apartment was due to the condition of their respective corpses. They seemed to be killed in a similar way, making them believe that it might also be due to an altered. They had yet to determine whether it was the same killer as in their case, or another unreported altered who had gone rogue. "I'm just a curious teenager. It's not every day that Slew is on the news. I sort of came here to see what all the fuss was about. It just seemed like a cool idea to be where all the action was. Now that I say it out loud, I don't actually know what I was expecting." Gary tried to explain, praying that they would take him for just a dumb teenager. "So what if you're a teenager? The suspect shouldn't be that much older than you. Come on, now that you know who we are, just spill the beans and tell us what you know." Sandy aggressively demanded. Hey, you're strongly implying something there. Just because both of them are teenagers doesn't mean they know each other, right?" Frank tried to calm his partner down. It was obvious to Gary that the two of them were playing a little game of good cop, bad cop, not that he would dare to call them out on it. "However, if you don't mind us asking, what's with the hood? If you really want to check things out, why would you try to sneak away after seeing the reporters?" Frank asked with a friendly smile, as if to hide the fact that he was calling the high schooler out on his contradiction. Since Frank was the good cop, Gary quickly grasped that he would be his answer to get out of his mess. His just a dumb teenager act seemed to have failed, but he was sure there was one way to convince them. He looked around left and right, before he slowly then pulled down his hood, revealing his bright green hair. I had my hair done recently. However, the result turned out far brighter than I wanted. Once I saw the reporters, I got scared that I could get interviewed. It's already bad enough that my friends were teasing me in school about it, but if my current appearance gets shown on TV, I would never live it down. I swear, I was only her because I was curious. Me and that Billy guy, we don't even go to the same school. First time I ever heard about him was on TV. Gary claimed, making a Scout's honor sign, even though he had never been part of them. It looked like Frank was trying to hold in his laughter after seeing Gary's hair. With his explanation, it certainly sounded like a tragic tale. "Oh, really? What school do you go to, and what's your name?" Sandy asked, seemingly not fully convinced yet. "Westbridge, Gary Dem, ma'am." Gary answered immediately. "You can check at the school. There was an odd stare that just wouldn't go away, and Sandy was still holding on to Gary's hand. A few seconds passed before she finally let go. Get out of here. A stupid kid like you shouldn't hang around crime scenes. I swear if we ever catch you near another one again, I'll personally bring you in for questioning. Sandy threatened, and Gary quickly ran off, thanking his lucky stars that he had just escaped a close call. Why did you let him go? Frank asked. Well, you heard him. Him and Billy don't go to the same school, but for someone who's not involved in the case, he sure did know enough about it. Do kids really pay attention to what's on the news these days? Perhaps I'm just being too cautious. It was a death that happened in the neighborhood, so maybe he did know about it. But just in case, take a note of the kid's name and school. If we find something linking Billy to them, we should pay him another visit at some point. Damn it, what do I do now? That woman made it abundantly clear that if they ever see me anywhere near the spots Billy might have been, it will just make matters worse. In the end, since Gary was unable to locate Billy anyway, he decided to head home after doing his regular daily quests. Before he knew it, the next day had arrived. Your bloodlust grows. 8 days until the next full moon. For the love of God. Oi, you stupid system. Don't you have an option to turn this off? I don't need a freaking reminder every day. I do have my own calendar, you know? Gary cursed internally. With the time until the next full moon approaching, Gary's temper was rising. He understood that getting frustrated at the situation didn't help, but cursing did help him calm down. The only good news was at least today, there was nothing in front of his door. As always, the weekend was over far too soon. Tom was looking at himself in the mirror. His swollen eye had healed up, but the bottom of his eyelid was still a little fat, causing him to squint a little. His parents had been very concerned about the wounds, so he had made up a lie that he had helped Gary, who had been accepted on the rugby team, with some training. If those two bastards would have only listened, there was no goddamn need to beat me into submission when I was already doing my best to make Gary quit the rugby team on my own. What should I do? Once they see him play again, will they come after me again? Tom wondered, still feeling the pain from last time. Maybe I can ask Gary to accompany me home? Or perhaps I could hide at his for a bit. There was a specific reason why Tom hadn't told Gary about the incident. He was worried that his best friend might snap and do something stupid to them if he found out. Now that he knew that the other was a werewolf who could transform, getting him angry wasn't exactly the best idea, especially so close to the full moon. Arriving at school, Tom eventually saw Gary in the hallway. Coincidentally, he came at the perfect time to see that someone else had blocked Gary's path, standing in the middle of the hallway. Surprisingly, it was neither Gil nor Barry. Instead, it was someone that they had come to know recently. Hey, Gary, I don't know what was up with you coming to the karate club the other day. That was really not cool what you did back there. Steven said, you only won because I was off guard. If it had been a real fight, don't think it would go the same way. Gary didn't even look at Steven as he was talking down on him. He had too much other stuff to worry about, and his mind was fully occupied with trying to figure out how to get rid of his problems, which already stressed him to the max. Steven, noticing that Gary was bluntly ignoring him, naturally took this the wrong way. Hey man, do you really think you're some hot sh*T? I know you, man. You did all of that to hit on Xian, but if she isn't going out with me, then there's no way in hell she'll be going out with you. Can you please just let me through? Gary almost shouted and barged past him, pushing him off to the side. Gary had been so loud that the other students who were conversing in the halls got silenced and turned around to look at the commotion. Hearing what was going on, they started whispering, and all these whispers were heard by Steven. They're talking about me. They must have heard about how I lost to him in a fight. Now, he's even pushing me in the hallway. Believing that the other students were talking about him, Steven felt like he had to set the record straight, to prove himself and make up for his loss. However, as a karateka, he couldn't just go around and start swinging fists. He needed Gary to start the fight, so he could claim it was self-defense, but not even mentioning Xian had annoyed him. You have a sister, right? Steven asked, and at that moment, Gary stopped inches before entering his classroom. It was obvious that this had gotten his attention. I heard that she's quite the looker. Tell you what, you can have Xian, and in turn I'll have her sister. Gary turned around and started to walk up to Steven, stopping just in front of him. Hey, Steven. Wadash before Stephen could finish his sentence. He felt Gary's hand grab the side of his head, only to slam it with great force into the side of the wall. Letting go of his head, Stephen's body slid down on the floor. Shut the F***CK up, Gary said. The corridor was silent until one of the girls started screaming since Stephen continued to lie on the floor unconsciously. He killed him. Gary just killed somebody, Tiffany screamed. Although it was unheard of that a scrawny high schooler would have the strength to kill someone with one hit, Gary was far from being an ordinary high schooler. In his rage, he had struck Stephen without holding back. Tom ran past the gathering crowd and checked out the situation. His best friend was still in disbelief about what he had just done. Gary just stood there, looking from the hand that had slammed Stephen into the wall to the body to his feet. Meanwhile, Tom had noticed the specks of red that started to run down the karateka's head. Examining the carotid artery, he let out a sigh of relief when he felt a pulse. Gary, snap out of it. He's okay, but we need to get him to the nurse ASAP. I mean, he's not okay, but at least he's alive. Now help me carry him. Tom called out to his friend, and quickly Gary went to the other side, lifting him off the ground as the two walked to the nurse's office. The crowd just watched them with their mouths wide open. None of them knew what they were supposed to do. Should they go and help the duo? Should they call a teacher? Perhaps an ambulance? In the end, the thing those high schoolers chose was to spread the news about this event to those who had missed it. Tom and Gary were lucky enough that no teacher was in the hallways, but they encountered someone else. XIN had just come from the toilet and was surprised to see 3 faces she recognized. What happened to him? XIN asked when she saw the way Stephen was carried by the two. Gary would have loved to explain himself to her, but he honestly didn't know how. The truth was he had just bashed the skull of his schoolmate in. Sure, Stephen had provoked him, but even Gary saw that he had vastly overreacted. As such, the duo just walked past, leaving XIN to listen to the rumors that had already begun to spread. He slammed him into the wall with just one hand. Casper told me that Josh, who was there, even heard the poor guy's skull crack. Stephen might never be able to be the same again. Does anyone know what he told that broccoli head to piss him off to that degree? I don't know. I heard the name XIN get mentioned. Hearing this, XIN felt a bit guilty. Had she somehow ended up being the cause of this mess? Were those stupid boys seriously fighting over me? Eventually, Tom and Gary brought Stephen over to the nurse's office. After briefly checking his vitals, the nurse immediately decided that this was something above her pay grade, so she called an ambulance. The high schooler was breathing, and she did what she could to keep him in stable condition, but for some reason he wasn't responding, nor did he show any signs of regaining consciousness. When asked what had happened, Gary mumbled he had been hit in the head, but there wasn't much details after that. The nurse had agreed to let them stay and miss the morning lessons, believing that the 3 of them were friends. It didn't take too long for the ambulance to arrive at school. After getting a brief account on what had happened, they took Stephen away, leaving Tom and Gary behind. Once her patient was out, the nurse left to go and make a report. What happened there, bro? Tom eventually asked, after making sure the nurse wouldn't come back, because she might have forgotten something. I don't know. Suddenly, all this anger, this rage, just came over me. The moment he mentioned Amy, images of him hurting my family came flooding into my head. All my senses were telling me that I needed to do everything I could to stop him. Before I even realized what I did, I saw him on the floor. Gary tried to explain as best he could. Nevertheless, he didn't tell Tom everything. If he was honest, he had actually wanted to hurt Stephen more. The only reason he had stopped was because panic had begun to set at the sight of the motionless teenager. His rational side returned, stopping him from further worsening the situation. Tom didn't ask him any more questions after that. However, he was very glad that he had decided to keep the truth about what had really happened to him on Friday hidden from his best friend. If Gary could get this crazy at the mere thought of someone hurting those close to him, the 2 of them would have most likely ended in a morgue rather than the hospital. Eventually, the 2 of them headed to their class. All eyes quickly turned to the 2 who had entered the room. Gary, you are finally here. There's no need for you to sit down. Headmistress Young wants to see you in her office. I'm sure you know why, Mrs. Bedford said, after briefly looking at who had disturbed her claws. It didn't go unnoticed, and for some reason, Gary felt pissed off at being ignored like that. Fortunately, his rational side was still in charge, so the high schooler just started walking to the principal's room, leaving Tom to sit down in class. What is wrong with me? How come everything is getting on my nerves today? Are people just arseholes today? Or am I being super sensitive? Gary wondered, worried that this might be the effect of the bloodlust his system kept mentioning. Above the double door, a plaque read Headmistress Young. He knocked at the door, and soon a come-in sounded from the other side. This was the first time he had been called in. Cautiously, Gary opened the door and entered the large office that was big enough to fit even a sofa and coffee machine inside. I would love to say that it's good to see you, Mr. Dim, but you should already be aware why you're here. Ironically, Mrs. Young's family name didn't match her outer appearance. She was an older woman with mostly gray hair. The light in her eyes showed that she was actually younger than she looked, and that the graying of her hair was mostly due to the stress that came with her position. We have already gathered the testimony of the students who saw this morning's event unfold, and a few minutes ago, the hospital sent me a report about Mr. Rickardson's condition. You might be elated to know that your schoolmate is awake and is doing relatively fine. There are no injuries other than some bruising on the outside of his head and a bump. Luckily, after some rest, he should be good as new. Unfortunately, this doesn't change the fact that his mother is out for blood. She wants something done, and I'm in no position to deny her request. We can't exactly allow you to get away scot-free after doing what you did. Fortunately, you were never really a troublesome student. While I personally don't understand why a young man like you would choose to dye his hair in that horrible color, it doesn't violate school regulations. It's also your first offense, so I would have usually just let you off with a warning, but due to how severe this case is, I'm afraid I can't do that. Honestly, Gary had expected to be shouted at the moment he came in. He had been prepared to get a good lecture about how dangerous and wrong his actions had been and how easily he could have ruined Stevens and his own future. The way Headmistress Young had chosen to talk with him as her equal had made it so he didn't find her annoying, yet the tone in her voice made him fear for the worst about what was going to happen next. I expect you to write an apology letter to the Richardsons family about how deeply you regret your actions. Now, I don't care if you really do or not, but for your own sake, you should make sure that it at least sounds sincere enough so that Mrs. Richardson won't pursue any legal actions against you. Apart from that, effective immediately, you're excluded from school for the rest of the week. Excluded, Gary repeated, standing up from his seat. You mean I won't be allowed to come to school for an entire week? Most teenagers disliked going to school and only did so because their parents told them to. Every holiday was a joy since it meant one day of not having to go to that dreaded place. So the concept of punishing someone by making them not go to school had always seemed rather bizarre. For a troublemaker, being excluded essentially meant they got a free week to do whatever they wished. However, now that Gary was suddenly faced with that situation, he began to realize the real horror of it. What the hell do I tell Mom? Their high school had a relatively good reputation in SLU. Getting suspended for a week was rather unheard of. In fact, any more than that, and it would have meant expulsion. Was this Mrs. Young's way of telling him how close he had come to being expelled? Suddenly, Gary started to consider the consequences about what would happen if that had happened. He would have to change schools, probably forcing his family to move apartments to another area. It might mean his mother would have to find new jobs. Essentially, it would ruin the lives of the entire Dem family. On top of that, with nothing to do but to stay at home on his own, he was worried that he might go mad, or worse, do something extremely stupid like go out and look for Billy. As someone who's now excluded, you won't participate in any more lessons. For the time being, you're to stay here. Feel free to start on that apology letter, and I will have my secretary bring you some other schoolwork later. Headmistress Young explained. Honestly, I would have just sent you home immediately, but there is a reason why I'm keeping you here. By now, the whole school is aware about what has occurred, including the teachers. One teacher in particular has strongly insisted for you to be let off. Gary was baffled to hear this. He wasn't particularly friendly with any of his teachers, nor did he excel at any subjects. His relationship with his homeroom teacher wasn't out of the ordinary either, so it was hard to pinpoint who exactly it could be. Never would have I thought there would come a day I would see Mr. Root begging me to not expel a student like you. Unlike what your stature suggests, he claims that you're a very gifted rugby player, one he simply can't do without. Mr. Root would have been the last person Gary would have suspected, even if he had been doing better in their training matches. Was it really to the point where they needed him this much? I have therefore agreed to make a special exception for you. Despite being excluded, you're allowed to attend the club lesson after school for the whole week, and that will include today. I will look forward to your performance on the weekend. For some reason, Gary felt quite happy with the news. At the moment, playing rugby really was the only distraction he had left. Given his performance, he was very excited to test himself in their first official game. After giving him the sheets of work he needed to go through, Mrs. Young stayed in the room doing her own work. Mom should be at her first job, so I doubt she already knows. Mrs. Young's secretary will probably notify Mom via a letter, so all I gotta do is get to it before she does. I sorta got a week off. Maybe I can use this to my advantage. It gives me more time to figure things out. Class had continued without Gary, yet Tom was constantly looking over at his friend's empty seat. He was worried for him in more ways than one. When Mrs. Bedford's class was over, Gary still hadn't returned, which told Tom that his best friend must be in some serious trouble. Tom had tried texting Gary during the breaks and at lunch, but he hadn't answered yet. Eventually, it was time for rugby practice. During his walk to the changing room, he encountered two large figures. Immediately, Tom put his head down, hoping to avoid eye contact, yet it did nothing. A few moments later, two heavy arms were over his shoulders. "Hey Tom, old buddy, why don't we have a talk before heading to practice today?" Gil suggested, with a smile as he started to push the smaller boy in a certain direction. Tom wanted to walk forward, but both of them had gripped him tightly. They were practically forcing him to come with them as they dragged him, lifting him slightly off the ground all the way to the closest toilets. As soon as they entered, they shouted to see if anyone else was inside. Once it was clear that it was just the three of them, they locked the door behind them. So, me and Barry went to check out the roster this afternoon, and for some reason Gary's name was still there. "Why is that?" Gil asked, shoving Tom's small body to the floor. "I didn't get the chance to talk to him yet." "You must have heard what happened this morning." Tom tried to explain, quickly checking the room for any way to escape his captors. "Grab him," Gil ordered, and Barry picked him off the ground, holding his hands up so he couldn't use them to defend himself. The next second, and a large slap from Gil's hand went right across Tom's face. His cheek turned bright red, and he could taste iron as the inside of his mouth had smashed against his teeth. "You could have texted him or talked to him over the weekend. Aren't you guys close?" "No. It looks to me like you didn't take what we told you seriously." Gil then grabbed Tom by the back of his head, shoving him into one of the toilet stalls. School toilets, although they were being cleaned regularly and this one hadn't been used today, weren't exactly the most clean places. "Hey Gil, don't you think this is taking things a bit too far?" Barry asked, but Gil didn't seem to be listening. The next moment, he shoved Tom's head into the toilet for a few seconds, pushing him down, watching him wiggle and struggle. While doing this, a smile appeared on his face. The feeling of having total control of another human life was exhilarating. Why are they doing this to me? What did I ever do to you?" Tom thought as he was cursing at his life. "I didn't even tell him what you guys did to me, because I'm trying to protect your sorry, miserable lives." Lifting his head out of the water, Tom gasped for air. He couldn't even say anything because all he was doing was trying to breathe. "This isn't enough," Gil declared after dunking him a couple of times. Barry realized that his friend had lost it, yet it seemed too late to stop him, and worse of all now, he was a part of whatever was about to happen. Out on the field, Gary had joined the club practice. He noticed that Tom wasn't out yet, but judging by the green mist, he could see that he was still somewhere in school. Tom didn't care for rugby in the first place, so it didn't matter if he was on time or not, and it didn't seem like the teacher did either, which was why Gary thought it wasn't so strange. Before the lesson started, Mr. Root had pulled Gary to the side. "Listen here, Broccoli Head, I don't know what exactly made you do what you did this morning, but let me tell you this. I'm used to dealing with kids who have anger problems and who have an aggressive nature. You didn't really seem the type, but you have proven me wrong more than once already. The good thing is, there's an easy fix. Use that pin-up anger, frustration, whatever is inside you out on the field. Use it to run faster from the others. Use it to snatch the ball out of their hands. And use it to tackle them to the ground, because on the field, all of that is allowed. The practice had started, and the words that Mr. Root used had spurred Gary on. In today's practice, he was playing even better than before. He was sharper, as if his eyes were glued to the ball. It was strange because his technique and play tactics weren't as sharp as someone like Blake, but he made up for it with his talent. Eventually, Gil and Barry also arrived on the field. Naturally, they got a scolding from Mr. Root, and after running a few laps, they were allowed to join in the practice game. Both of them tried to tackle Gary when he was in possession of the ball, but they were too slow. Instead, a couple of the faster, lighter students managed to get a hold of him. Still, Gary, with his power, was able to move forward until he passed on the ball to Blake, allowing him to score the try that won them the practice game. Both Blake and Gary were praised as if they had won the World Cup. The two of them had proven to be an unexpectedly good match as a team. "You two," Mr. Root said. "If you can repeat what you did today on the weekend, we are going to destroy Eaton High." Gary was enjoying the praise, just like he had done on Friday, and his mood felt better than before, but he noticed something. Although rugby practice was nearly over, Tom wasn't on the bench. His mist was still in the school. Once it was over, Tom never having appeared, instead of heading to the locker room, Gary decided to head indoors and follow the mist to his location. "I know I'm not meant to go to school, but lessons are over anyway, so it won't matter, right?" Gary thought, as he was too concerned for his friend to care, even if that wasn't the case. He was surprised to find the mist leading him to the toilets, especially since they weren't too far away from the changing rooms. Just standing outside, though, Gary was now even more concerned because his nose picked up a scent he had recently become overly familiar with. Blood. He quickly pushed the door open and followed the mist to one of the stalls. Opening it, he could see Tom, lying on the ground, his front teeth shattered with blood spilling out on the toilet seat. Annoying alarm that usually woke him up long before his sister Amy certainly also had a part to play in that. Stretching, Gary checked his status, already expecting to see some changes. Unsurprisingly, his daily quests had once again refreshed, but there was also a new notification waiting for him. Your bloodlust grows. 10 days until the next full moon. Unlike yesterday, there were no mentions of any additional stats, due to it being closer to the full moon, though. After looking at his phone, he realized that it was already 11 a.m., meaning that he only had 1 hour before meeting up with Tom. Holy crap, I slept in this late. Gary cursed internally, getting dressed as quickly as possible before leaving the apartment. 30 seconds later, he returned, making sure to bring along Kai's phone as well this time. Heading to the town center where the library was located, Gary decided to run there. This method didn't use up any money, and he found it to be a good way to check whether he might actually increase his energy bar this way. Energy and health were both stats under the werewolf system, so if he could naturally improve strength and endurance, why not those two? It was at least worth a shot, although it was mostly about saving money. The library was a 3-story building and had been built at the edge of the shopping street, at the end of all the shops. It was primarily used by university students who actually had a hopeful future ahead of them. It was one of the few safe areas of town where the police regularly patrolled, which was why gangs left it untouched. The gangs, in the first place, during the day, didn't interfere much with the general business that would operate in the high street. Gary's powerful eyesight allowed him to see Tom already waiting for him, but from the distance, he could also see that something was wrong with his friend. Slowing down his stride, his happy face quickly turned sour. "What happened to you?" Gary asked. Tom put on a smile and touched his swollen and cut eye. "This, oh man, I was watching one of Kirk's altered fights, and then as I went out of my room, I wanted to try out his tornado kick. Stupid me, I fell down the stairs and banged up my eye on the banister pretty badly." Although a fall down the stairs might explain some of it, Tom also had other markings on his body. Ignoring Tom's dislike for most physical activities, falling down the stairs was pretty much the textbook answer someone gave when trying to hide something. Could it be trouble at home? No, his parents aren't like that. They treasure their golden boy too much to hurt him. Gary thought, He knew that something was up, but Tom's behavior made it clear he didn't exactly want to talk about it. Given how many secrets of his own Gary was keeping from his best friend, he didn't feel it was right for him to push him on the matter. So what move was it again? Gary asked, pretending to accept the explanation he had been presented as they both entered the library together. As with any library, it was very quiet, so they kept their mouths shut until reaching the third floor where they could access the public computers. Tom searched up all the relevant books in a library that they might need. Using the internet, he just looked up the pages and information they actually needed. Tom was reading through them all and writing down notes that Gary didn't quite understand. So for now, he was just being used as a delivery boy. Whenever Tom would find a book they thought that could be of use, Gary would be asked to go get it, constantly going back and forth between, until finally, clicking his fingers and rubbing his good eye, Tom was satisfied with the research he had done. All right, I believe I've learned everything there is to know about alpha, beta, and omega wolves, Tom claimed, folding his arms proud. Let's start with what applies with actual wolves. According to the lore I found, it should more or less coincide. Still, take all of this information with a pinch of salt. Tom flipped the notepad he had brought with him and opened a blank page. He then pulled out a marker pen and wrote the word alpha. While explaining, he would write out the points and explain everything to Gary. Wolves are creatures that often hunt in packs, so every pack has their leader. These are the so-called alphas. A wolf pack usually has an alpha male and his alpha partner. These two could be seen as the family leaders. Beta wolves are pretty much wolves that are under the alpha. They could be their siblings, their children, or even outsiders. However, they all belong to a pack, following the alpha or alphas. Are you following so far? Tom asked and Gary nodded. Okay, I get those too. But if an alpha is like the leader of a gang and the betas are like his henchmen and subordinates, then what exactly is an omega? Gary asked. His optional quest told Gary to turn an omega wolf into a beta, but this was where his confusion was setting in. Assuming he himself was the alpha wolf, was it referring to his siblings like Amy, or maybe his mother was the alpha wolf and he and his sisters were considered betas? This is where things get a little interesting, Tom answered, flipping his notebook to a blank page once again. An omega wolf is usually an outsider to a family or someone belonging to no family. Either way, they're usually at the bottom of the hierarchy. Essentially, after everyone else has gotten their food, the omega has to eat whatever is left. So far, if Gary was being classified as werewolf in these terms, he wasn't sure what he was. I know you're talking about wolves, but werewolves are part human, right? So how does this work? There are quite a few rules here, and it gets a bit complicated, but essentially a werewolf can turn another with a bite. Alpha wolves bite and turn those they wish to work under them, thereby creating beta wolves. Once turned, the beta wolves can also turn others, making them into other beta wolves that will have to listen to the alpha, to an extent I should add, but let's keep it simple for now. Hearing this, a shaking realization came to Gary's mind. A bite can turn someone out. No, when a system message came up saying, I made an omega wolf. Images flashed in Gary's head to the time he had lost it slightly. At one point during his fight against Billy Buster, his sanity had left him and he had only wanted to win by all means. As he recalled, he had ended up biting the guy. Yesterday, the news reported Billy was on the run and his parents were dead. Don't tell me, was I responsible for this by fighting him? Is he really a werewolf now? Wait, you said that if an alpha bites someone, they would turn them into a beta, that they would have to follow them. So what about an omega? Gary asked, realizing that something was strange about the wording of the quest. As for an omega wolf, in most cases they seem to be wolves who have been kicked out of a pack. However, that doesn't always have to be the case. For instance, they could also be the only surviving wolf of a group. In a way, you could say that alpha and beta wolves are just omega wolves who belong to a pack and have a hierarchy amongst themselves. When seeing Tom lying on the floor in the bathroom stall, there was a mix of emotions that came over Gary. Most prominently worry about his best friend's condition, followed by anger at whoever had done this to him. Yet there was one feeling he hadn't expected: hunger. The smell of blood coming from Tom's mouth was strong. While out on the field, Gary hadn't been hungry at all, But suddenly, being confronted with this tantalizing scent, he felt as if he hadn't really eaten in days, only to stumble upon a fresh grilled barbecue. Saliva started to escape his mouth. Fortunately, Gary's other feelings quickly snapped him out of his daze. He shook his head to regain his clarity and wiped off the drool. The high schooler carefully grabbed Tom by his shoulders and put him into an upright position. With his face no longer on the floor, Gary started to inspect the other's condition. From what he could see, one of his front teeth looked to have beaten out, while the one next to it was slightly chipped. There was also the wound on his head, but Gary had no idea whether he had any inner injuries. Looking in the toilet, the bowl of water had turned red. Although his best friend's wounds didn't seem fatal, he could tell that Tom had been put through a lot of pain. He didn't even want to imagine how long he had been tortured like this, since he had been missing the entire rugby practice. "Tom, are you okay? Talk to me, please." "What should I do?" Gary asked, despite realizing how dumb the first question was given the situation. Having been lifted from the floor and hearing his name being called out, Tom slowly came to. He hadn't been knocked out, yet the pain had been too much for him. The experience of getting tortured had been so tiring that by the time Barry and Gil had left, his body had practically shut down to concentrate on healing. "Gee, Gary," Tom weakly whispered, yet the pain was still overwhelming him. After looking who it was, Tom had closed his eyes again, wanting nothing more than to return to sleep. Seeing his best friend still alive, Gary let out a sigh of relief. He knew that he couldn't just leave him here, since Tom needed medical help. With no outer wounds, he carefully lifted his friend's buddy off the ground and placed him on his shoulders while holding him from behind. The high schooler hoped that it wouldn't worsen his condition, but he started running straight to the nurse's office. She was naturally surprised to see him for the second time today. The nurse wanted to say something to him about this morning's situation, especially since she had learned the truth of the earlier situation. However, Gary didn't stop. He went right past her and gently placed Tom on one of the beds. "Help him," Gary pleaded with tear-filled eyes. Seeing how much blood was there, the nurse was worried it was a serious wound and went to help him straight away. Once again, though, there was only so much she could do, but there was good news. After giving Tom some painkillers, since his teeth were the area that had suffered the most damage, there was nothing else. This wasn't an urgent case, so there was no need for the ambulance to be called, but she did have to make a report and strongly suggested for Tom to go to the hospital as soon as possible to get his mouth looked at. "Are you sure that is how you found him?" "It wasn't. It wasn't me," Gary replied aggressively, realizing what she was implying. "I admit that Stephen was me, but this time I'm innocent. Mr. Root and the other students can testify that I was at rugby practice the whole time. After that, I went to the toilet because I had to, and that's where I found him." The nurse still gave him a questionable look, but she had to leave. Not only was school over, but now she had to inform someone of what had happened, leaving Gary and Tom alone once again. Nevertheless, she was inclined to believe Gary was telling the truth this time. Not only because he claimed to have witnesses this time who can prove his innocence, but more so because he had genuinely been concerned for Tom and had even been tearing up when they came through the door. Gary had decided to stay by Tom's side until he eventually woke up again. This time, due to the painkillers, he wasn't in as much pain as he was before, allowing him to stay awake for longer. However, before Tom could even say anything, Gary was there with his own question. "Who did this to you?" Gary asked. "Why did they do this?" Tom could see it. That look was in his best friend's eyes again. "Gary, please, just forget about it. Forget about it. Forget about it. After they did all of this to you, do you realize that it was lucky that I even found you? If you let people like that get away without any consequences, then what will happen? Next time, you might not get so lucky. What if they do worse things to you? Whatever they did to you, I'll make sure they experience the same pain as you did," Gary claimed, holding onto the side of the bed frame that was made of metal, squeezing tightly. With Tom not answering, Gary soon let go of the handle to pace up and down, hoping to calm down, and looking at the metal handle by the side of his bed, he could see that it had bent slightly. I can't tell Gary who did this, otherwise those guys." "Gary, I'm not denying that you have a point, but think about your circumstances. The whole school knows what happened to you after Stephen. You've been excluded. If you do anything of that sort again, then that means you will be expelled straight away, no matter how small your transgression is. I know your family situation. Have you thought about what happens with Amy and your mother if that happens? I appreciate the gesture, but do you really want to do this to them? Listening to what Tom was saying, it brought the anger out of Gary slightly, as the images of his family appeared in his head. In the first place, everything he was doing was for them. He wanted to get revenge for Tom, and he wanted to help him out, but he did realize that his best friend was protecting him in his own way by not telling him who these people were, even though he already had a slight suspicion. Aside from Tom, there had only been 2 other students who hadn't been there the whole time. Gary was about to leave it there, but then he remembered that Tom had arrived at the library with a black eye. Putting these 2 incidents together, this wasn't the first time he had been hurt. Do you think they won't attack you again? Gary asked. Tom gulped, because he wasn't sure of the answer himself. He had expected to be bullied a bit because of Gary, but something was clearly wrong with Gil. He seemed to have really enjoyed the power he had had over Tom, rather than doing it for his own teammates' sake. It was then that Tom had heard the door to the nurse's office shut, since Gary had already left. However, Gary hadn't left without anything in his hand. When the nurse had taken a look at Tom, she had taken his bloody shirt off and changed it for a set of clean robes. Right now, Gary had it in his hand. Tom was bleeding a lot, so whoever hurt him, their scent should also be here. As someone who was a normal teenager up until last week, becoming a werewolf and acting like that didn't come naturally to Gary. Unfortunately, his system didn't help him in any meaningful way to find the culprits. While it was easy enough to follow the mist of those he had marked, it was a different story when he had to try and pick up a scent from the bloody mess that was Tom's shirt. He would take a few steps, and every so often he would take another sniff of the shirt. Being in a school that had a few hundred students didn't make his task any easier either. It's somehow easier to focus when I close my eyes there. I think it should be in that direction. Gary opened his eyes and soon found himself outside on the field. It hadn't been too long since rugby practice had finished, so the scents of his teammates were still fresh. Surprisingly, he noticed that the scent that he had picked up had split in different directions. I'm sure of it. There really was more than one person behind it. So much for giving them the benefit of the doubt. Here I even had some sympathy for that stupid bastard. 2 members had arrived late for rugby practice. Everything was starting to fall into place. Gary took a big sniff, and now he was sure of it. One of the scents was in the same direction as the strange red mist he could see that led him to Barry. Why the hell did they attack Tom? Gary tensed his fist so hard that it felt like his veins were going to pop from his hands. Is it really just because they don't want you to be on the team? They couldn't go for me, so they went for Tom? What bull crap is that? Gary swung out his hand, hitting the school wall. Usually a swing so fast and so hard would have shattered someone's wrist, but not Gary. At the moment, he didn't feel any pain. Fortunately, the high schooler hadn't directly aimed for the wall, otherwise he might have left his fist print. Looking at the mist, it told him that Barry was still in school for whatever reason. Since he had been marked, Gary didn't worry about losing him. No, he was far more interested in Gil. His scent had left the school grounds. The words of Tom still rang through his head, that if he was to do anything, then he would be expelled, especially after the incident today. Whatever I do outside of school shouldn't be a problem as long as nobody recognizes me. Lifting up his hood, Gary started to walk out of school. He always walked around in a hoodie, so he could cover up his hair and face. He used to do that as a transporter, but now it proved useful to avoid members of the underdogs, though today it would have a different use. Tom's shirt had been placed in his bag, and whenever he lost Gil's scent among the myriad of others, he would take another sniff to catch it. Once he entered more problematic areas, the number of scents decreased sharply. On his way, he also did his routine stop at the convenience store, eating some meat, restoring his energy from his rugby match just in case he needed it. 230/460 experience. Skill activated, charging heart. All stats have temporarily been doubled. -10 energy points. Running through the streets, Gary had started to hurry, tracking down the scent, afraid that perhaps Gil might reach home soon. Eventually, he noticed that he had entered a certain area in Slough. Doesn't this area belong to the Grey Elephant Gang? They're the second biggest gang after the underdogs, and also the ones controlling the gray color gang. Gary thought to himself, but it still wasn't completely dark out. The sun was just starting to set, so the gangs usually wouldn't bother others anyway. Not that Gary was particularly worried if they chose to attack him. Following Gill's scent, Gary moved away from the residential area and followed him to the industrial one, arriving in front of abandoned warehouses. He had never been here, but he recognized that such a location practically screamed gang hangout. The high schooler had to be extra cautious. Fighting off a group and an entire gang were two completely different things. Having tracked the scent to one warehouse in particular, he could now see that there were members wearing pieces of gray clothing on the outside. He could hear some cheering all the way from his location. He sneaked around the outside until found a pipe that led to the roof. Gary wasn't the best climber, but he had been practicing, and with charging heart still active, jumping up and grabbing onto the pipe proved to be easy. Using his hands and legs, he soon found himself on the metallic roof. The high schooler was careful with his footsteps since it would make quite a bit of noise, but luckily there were also plenty of seagulls on the roof. Whenever they would move, they would make the roof clang regardless of how quiet he was, and it seemed like whatever was happening inside, they were far too preoccupied with what was happening. Finding a hole in the roof, Gary was happy to see that it allowed him to watch what was happening underneath. His enhanced hearing also allowed him to hear what they were saying. "Not bad, kid." A male voice praised someone. "Your skill, your strength, and most of all your ruthlessness are the real deal. You're perfect. There's just one last thing for you to do before we let you in our gang." One person stood there, bloody and battered, yet he was in a far better condition than the other guy around his feet. Gary had only heard about it, but he assumed that he had just walked in on the gray color gang having held something akin to an audition. There were a couple of ways to join a color gang, but the most direct one was the scene Gary had just stumbled upon. Those willing to join could challenge already active members, and if they proved themselves, the color gang would usually offer to recruit them. That's him. He was the one that hurt Tom. Gary could still smell Tom's blood on his clothes, even though it was now mixed in with the other person's on the ground. "You will join us on our rounds today. After that, we'll discuss your payment and more. I have hope for you. If you do well and rise up, then you might even be accepted into the Gray Elephants." Gary would love nothing more than to jump down and pay back Gil, but his rational side was still present. His first instinct was nothing but suicidal. There were around 30 members inside, and the person that Gil was speaking to seemed to be their leader. No leader of any gang would be an easy person to deal with, especially belonging to the color gang underneath the Gray Elephants. He could continue to follow Gil and his scent, but from the sounds of it, the leader himself might be the one to show Gil the ropes. There was no guarantee that Gary would get a chance to get his revenge today, and there was also another problem. He still needed to hurry home to intercept the letter about his exclusion from school. His mother should be working late tonight, so he should still have some time. It was then that the system answered his prayers, solving his issue once again. "You have successfully tracked down a target using your keen nose. You are acting more like a werewolf and less than a human by the day. Bloodlust has been detected. Would you like to activate a force bond?" Last time he had marked Barry by accident, though he had been holding him by the wrist. Now it appeared as if physical touch wasn't a necessary requirement. Now that he thought about it, Gary realized that back when he had defeated the color gang members, the system had also offered him to activate a force bond, even though he hadn't touched them. At the time, he had declined, but now that Gary saw the message with his emotions running high, he didn't hesitate. "Yes, force bond has been activated. 3/5 marks have been assigned." Gary hadn't been considering the consequences of marking Gil. He wasn't sure what would happen when the full moon came out, and quite frankly, he didn't care the moment. Now that he had made sure that he would always be able to find Gil, it was time for him to head home. As he left the area, he could see that the marking worked as intended. A visible red mist trail could be seen in the air leading to him. Now he had two markings, one for Barry and one for Gil, but the way Gary was able to tell the difference between the two of them was due to the different scent each mist would give. Quickly, using a charging heart for the second time, Gary rushed back, skipping his daily gym workout, and headed to his apartment block. While doing so, The images of Tom were appearing through his head. Those guys, why would they hurt him that badly? Gary ran faster and faster, leaping over trash cans in the middle of the street, without slowing down. Tom, why didn't you say anything? With how late they were, they must have been torturing you all that while. How could you protect that scum? The smile on Gil's face, that was not the face of a human. He's a monster worse than me. He will just come back to hurt you again and again. So I need to make sure he doesn't get the chance. The good news was that the running had quenched Gary's anger a little, and he had made it back to his apartment far quicker than he had anticipated, even with his newfound powers. Opening the door, he quickly looked down to search for the letter that his school surely must have already sent out. However, it wasn't there. More accurately speaking, there was nothing there. Usually, there would at least be spam letters advertising something, if not overdue bills that piled up. Unfortunately, someone appeared to have already collected all this. Are you looking for this? Amy asked, holding up a letter in her hand while standing in the kitchen. The rest of the missing letters were also on the countertop. Amy. Gary rushed over and was far quicker than she had expected. The letter was quickly snatched from her hand before she had any chance to hide it behind her back. Just as he had expected, the letter was to inform his mother that Gary had been excluded for a week for getting into a fight to the point of sending a schoolmate into the hospital. Hey, you know I'm still going to tell Mom. Amy said, pouting. Ever since you came back with your green hair, I was worried that one day you would do something stupid, but this? Seriously, I know that you like watching those altered fights, but you've never gotten in a fight before. What was it even about that you sent the other guy into the hospital? A girl or a boy? Or maybe just some stupid boy stuff? Amy couldn't stop asking her older brother questions driven by a mix of worry and curiosity. There's no way I can tell Amy that I got into a fight because he threatened to date her. That would just be too embarrassing. Gary's face was going red just at the thought of it. Still, he needed to figure out a way to stop Amy from telling their mother. Otherwise, not only would he get an earful and worry her to death, she probably wouldn't let him freely leave the house anymore either. He would be grounded, and he just couldn't afford that in his current situation. Why did you even open the letter in the first place? It's not even addressed to you. Gary tried to change the subject, clearly annoyed that his sister wouldn't back down. Because I saw your school logo on it. Schools only send letters home if it's good news or bad news. And come on. With your head, what the hell kind of good news would there be? If it was something I wasn't meant to see, I planned to just close the letter and place it back in as if I never opened it. Amy smugly replied, aware that she had the moral high ground on this one. Seeing no way out of the situation, there was really only one thing Gary could do. Please, I beg you, just don't tell Mom. You should know how much she would worry. It's just a week. I will manage to somehow keep it hidden from her. Gary pleaded, I promise to make it worth your while. Unexpectedly, his little sister held out her hand, turning her head away. Fine, but you owe me. If you wanted to keep it a secret, then it's going to cost you. A few seconds later, she felt something in her hand. Opening her eyes, she saw a 50 note in her hand. For a moment, Gary could swear that he saw Amy's eyes turn into gold bars. When his little sister had asked for payment, she hadn't literally meant money. She had intended to blackmail Gary into taking over her chores for this week. Either that, or perhaps make him act like her servant or bodyguard next time she visited Stacy, but this was much better than all of those options. How do you even have this much money? Amy asked. Don't tell me you robbed the guy on top of sending him to the hospital? The truth was, other than the 500 he had stashed away in their room, Gary had been now down to the last 100 from the first paycheck he had earned that day fighting against Billy Buster. And now he had given Amy half of that just so that she would keep quiet. Nothing of that sort. What do you take your brother for? Gary protested, but Amy pointed to the letter he still held in his hand. You know, how I've been claiming to visit Tom a lot lately. Well, the truth is I've been helping out another friend of mine with their family business. They give me money for helping out. At the end of each day, I get paid in cash. I haven't told Mom because you know what she's like. She would just feel bad and tell me to stop, saying it's an adult's job to take care of their family. But, you know, I'm also part of this family. Hearing this, Amy felt a little bad for taking the money. Gary had worked hard for this money, and he had done so for the sake of everyone. Ark, here, take it back, Amy said, shoving it back in Gary's hand. After you tell me all that, What kind of person would I be to take it? You think about others too much. She sighed, making her way back to her room. Wait, are you going to tell Mom? Gary called out after her. No, just do what you want. Amy turned around and smiled. Although her brother wasn't the brightest, he really was the best brother she had. I'll try to think of a way for Mom to accept the money, if you have more of it. Now, knowing that his sister wouldn't reveal the situation, Gary went out with the letter, destroying it on his way out. Wait, it's already this late. Are you going to your work again? Amy asked worriedly. Nope, I need to return something to someone. Gary replied and shut the door. It was time for him to hunt. Once outside, Gary found it easier to distinguish between the two different force bond markings. Although both of them were red in color, each one gave off a slightly different scent. The closer he got to one of those that were marked, the darker the color of the mist would get. It made Gary wonder if there was a limit to his marking. Perhaps once he was far enough away, the red mist would completely disappear, but even in his own home, he could still see all three marks. His dark hood was covering his head, but he had no time to replenish the energy he had lost so far from using Charging Heart twice and the general energy he had used up rushing home and trying to catch up to Gil in the first place. 88/110 energy. The gray color gang shouldn't stray too far from their territory, but they'll probably want to head into a more residential area. Thinking about this, Gary realized that the gray color gang area also happened to cover where he had been on Sunday, the residential area where Billy's apartment block was located. One problem at a time, Gary thought to himself. Besides, given how many reporters there were just yesterday, they would be stupid to go anywhere near it. While the underdogs covered most of the town's nightclubs and profited from selling drugs among other things, the Gray Elephants specialized in protection of the several factories and warehouses that were located in Slough. The organizations needed protection from the other gangs that might look to profit by stealing their equipment, products, or might generally come over to harass their employees. It wasn't exactly uncommon in the business to hire some gangs to use those kinds of means to make life more difficult for their competitors. As such, the Gray Elephants would send out their members as bodyguards and would spread the news who was under their protection. They would usually get a percentage of profits, but it was far better to the alternative, making it an arrangement that ultimately profited both sides. As for companies that wanted to rent or set up a factory without relying on the gang, well, they naturally had their ways of convincing how much their service was needed. The air was filled with a gray smoke that covered everything, including the lampposts that were out, and it was messing with Gary's nose a little. If it wasn't for the red mist he had followed on his way here, he would have struggled a lot more to find them. From what I have heard, the Gray Elephants and their color gang have quite the fighting strength given their job scope. If I see one of their main members, I'm going to have to get out of there. News about my little trick must have already spread in their circles, so I doubt they will follow me. Not that there are any nearby areas that I could lead them to. Continuing to stalk them, the color gang eventually stopped in front of a small workshop that looked to be a shoe and key making service. Gil was there with 4 other members, but there was no sign of any other members in the nearby vicinity. The problem was they were on a pretty open street, so there was a chance that other members could come along quite easily. So Gary needed to wait for the perfect opportunity. Break it, new boy. A member with a gray bandana tied around the top of his head yelled out the order. The next second, Gil picked up a large brick on the side of the road and hurled it into the window, which immediately bounced off, nearly hitting him in the head. The other members, seeing this, laughed straight away. That's reinforced glass, you idiot. All the shops in this area have it, otherwise they would have to buy a replacement every day. The gray color member that had ordered Gil around seemed to be the leader of the small group they were in. Gil did not look too pleased at this little joke they had set up. A few seconds later, an old frail man came running out. He held a broomstick in his hand and pointed it out towards the gang. What are you hooligans doing? This is my shop. How many times do I have to tell you that I have no money? My shop has been here for over 30 years. I won't give it to you. You'll have to take it off my dead body. The old man shouted as he swung the broomstick widely, but all of the members, including Gil, were easily able to evade it. He tried to do it again and again, but he never managed to hit any of them, making them laugh at his antics, until he was tired out huffing and panting loudly. Okay, new boy, here's your first task of the day. We need new business in this town, and this geezer hasn't been willing to play ball. So it's time we let someone else in who will be more willing to cooperate. You've heard the old coot. Apparently we'll have to get it over his dead body. So let's put his conviction to the test. Gil understood what the leader was implying. When he went up to the old man, a smile appeared on his face. Seeing this, the other members stopped their laughter, interested in whether Gil could actually follow through. There were many reasons why people chose to join a gang. Some, like Inu, did it because they were unable to find a place for themselves in the world, their only talent being that they were decent with their fists. Others, like Gary, did it because in the current times, gangs were one of the easiest ways to earn money. However, those like Gil did it for a completely different reason. His type was the most dangerous. The sadistic smile on his face said it all. He enjoyed the feeling of dominance, making others submit to him by using violence. The old man tried to muster all his stealth, grabbing the broom, and swung it towards Gil, but the large high schooler managed to grab it quite easily. Old man, your strength is nothing for a member of the rugby club, Gil said, pulling on the stick and yanking it out of the old man's hand, who almost fell over tumbling to the ground. You know, although these things are made from wood, they're pretty strong. You just tried hitting me with it, so all of this is just self-defense. Let's see how much it hurts, Gil shouted, as he lifted up the stick and slammed it against the old man's side. The pain was so great the old man instantly fell to the ground. The others watching could see that Gil showed no hesitation. It was one thing for someone to fight their way into a gang by beating up another gang member, but new members would usually still have some hesitation to fight civilians. The old man screamed, rolling on the ground. It hurts. How could you do this? Imagine if I was your grand dash. Shut up, Gil shouted, whacking the broomstick on the old man's legs again. Shut up, shut up. Each time the high schooler used his full strength, and the old man's moans only got stronger. Hey, shouldn't we stop him? We were only supposed to scare him, but if he kills the old man, the gray elephants might tell us off. One of the members asked their leader. Humans aren't as weak as you think. He hasn't even really started to beg us to stop. The old coot still has some fight left in him. Oi, is that all you got, new boy? The leader shouted, trying to spur on Gil even more. How long does it take you to convince one frail old man to do the right thing? Up until this point, Gil had been holding the broomstick with one hand, worried that if he were to use both hands that it would end up breaking. Getting the okay from the leader, he lifted it above his head and used his full strength and weight to swing it down on the old man. Suddenly, a hooded person appeared almost out of nowhere and grabbed the stick before it could reach its intended victim. Screw waiting for the perfect time. I can't just watch you torment an innocent old man. Gary yelled out. System, put both points into strength. 2 points have been allocated into strength. Your base strength is now at 7. Current strength, 14, plus 1. With charging heart and the power of the moon, Gary pulled the stick out of Gil's hands. While the bully was still confused about the situation, the newcomer used both his hands to swing it out from the side like a baseball bat, hitting Gil across the face, flinging his head back, and causing him to fly through the air for a few meters until he hit the ground. Looking on the floor, there was a single tooth that had fallen out. That's a start. Gary thought about Tom's missing tooth, but it still wasn't enough. Although Gary was already level 4, he had only ever assigned one of the 3 stat points he had received from his level ups. He had considered what stat he might use them for, but had decided that it might make more sense to increase them via his gym, trying until he hit some kind of wall. However, seeing Gil attack the old man who could hardly defend himself, something snapped in Gary's head. It was similar to what had happened when Stephen had threatened him by telling him he would go out with Amy. The high schooler imagined Tom lying on the ground, getting bullied by Gil. Unable to wait for his perfect opportunity, the high schooler dived right in, running past the other members, while placing his stat points into strength. The broom snapped after connecting with Gil's face, and Gary still held one half of it in his hand, his head slightly facing down so the others wouldn't be able to see his face clearly. What the hell? I thought the new guy had some strength, but it turns out his muscles are all hot air. Oi, aren't you embarrassed getting taken out by Such a scrawny kid? One of the gray color gang members turned around to make fun of Gil, not having grasped the seriousness of the situation yet. However, the same could not be said about their leader. Unlike the other three, he had watched Gil fight, so he had seen his strength. His body didn't just look the part, and there weren't many that could make someone fall easily like that. What's more, that scrawny kid had managed to make the broom snap with one attack. What you guys doing? He might just be the new kid, but since when do we allow anyone to just hurt one of our members? Stop gawking and bring him in, the leader shouted. Seeing the other three charge in, Gary was thankful for one thing. None of them seemed to be using weapons. One of the traits of the gray color group was that they relied on brute strength. Still, Gary went to the injured Gil and lifted him by the scruff of his uniform. Don't think this is over. I'm not done with you yet. Blood was dripping from the rugby player's mouth, and he was possibly in a worse state than Steven, but Gary had no sympathy for him, not after what he had seen him do. Making use of Charging Heart's duration, he lifted Gil above his head with both hands. Even with an effective total of 15 points of strength, the weight seemed to be a bit much for Gary, but his frustration allowed him to power through. He managed to throw his schoolmate towards the gray color gang members, crashing into two of them. The third one, as the only one unaffected, turned around to check on his teammates, disbelieving what he had seen. This turned out to be a big mistake, as by the time he turned back to Gary, the other was already in the midst of a punch, aimed straight at the gang member's face. You guys are just as bad, Gary shouted. He could only imagine what the gray color gang members must have been doing in this area for so long. All the chaos and trouble they had caused. The truth was, Gary wasn't the only one who wanted them gone. Yet nobody ever did anything because they were afraid of those behind the color gangs. In the past, if Gary had seen such a scene, would he have been brave enough to help out? The truth was the answer was no. New quest received. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Your anger has finally led you to this. Deal with the one you're after as well as everyone protecting him. Quest reward. 50 EXP per defeated person. Your opponent has been knocked out. 50 EXP gained. EXP to 80/460. Receiving this message, it made Gary realize something, that Gil still had some room for a beating. Walking over, the two that were trapped under this heavy body soon pushed him off and got up from the ground. Don't just stand there, Bowden. Give us a hand. One of the members complained. Since they still had the number advantage, he was confident they could win. No real names, you idiot. The leader shouted at him, slapping him from behind, while he waited and watched Gary. The three of them stayed back, and with the leader taking a step back, so did the other two. That's when he noticed that their attacker wasn't looking at them. Instead, he only seemed to have eyes for Gil, who was on the floor. After being hit by the broom, Gil's head was spinning slightly. He wasn't knocked out yet, and he could hear the chaos around him, though he was unable to react to it. He tried to stand back up, but his legs felt like jelly. Recovering a little, he soon felt someone above him, and the next second he experienced a slap against his face. Oh no, you don't just get out of the situation by losing consciousness. You still have plenty of teeth left in your mouth, Gary said. Gil was still struggling to open his eyes, yet before he could, his head was slammed into the concrete ground once more. It was soon lifted from the ground again. His forehead had been cut, and blood was dripping down from the top, now covering his vision even more. It was then that the gray leader was sure that his hunch was right. Let's just get out of here, boys. That person isn't here for us. The three left Gil behind, including the other member. The leader thought it was safe to leave him behind, since he should wake up soon, and he was more concerned about what would happen if they tried approaching the person in front of them again. That person is another beast. Let the two of them deal with each other, the leader thought as he left. Holding up Gil, Gary could tell he was still conscious. It seemed to have been the right call to cancel Charging Heart, instead of using his full strength. Tell me, how does it feel? Not so great when you're on the receiving end. Now, is it? You still like to hurt people? I don't get how you can enjoy this so much. Gary shouted at him before getting ready to whack his head against the concrete ground once more. Gil, in his desperate situation, used his hands to cover his head hitting the ground, but the impact was still strong. Who are you? Gil blurted out, his mouth filled with blood, while his entire body still hurt from being used as a projectile. He hadn't even realized yet that the side of his face had swollen up from getting hit with a broomstick. Gary still wasn't done yet, and he wouldn't be until the system gave him the EXP for knocking Gil out. Grabbing his head once more, he was ready to slam in the ground again, but it was then that he felt someone grab his wrist. "Stop! If you keep doing that, you'll end up killing him." A male voice cautioned him. Looking up at what could possibly have the strength to hold Gary, he could see a man in a large black trench coat and a scruffy beard, while also wearing a large hat to cover most of his head. "I've been watching you. You managed to knock out a gang member all by yourself, and you even managed to lift up this kid over your head despite the size difference. Are you sure you are human?" The man asked as he reached down his pocket to grab what looked like a baton. There have already been a couple of killings in this area, and it seems the wounds inflicted aren't done by normal humans. The man pressed the button, and the baton lit up. Blue sparks started to buzz around the weapon. Once upon a time, they used to be self-defense weapons, yet under the No Lethal Weapons Act, they were still considered taboo. There is only one group who still use them despite this: the Altered Hunters. New quest received. There's always a bigger fish. As a werewolf who hasn't even experienced his first turning, you're still too weak. Survive. Quest reward. Gary was quite surprised that for the first time the werewolf system didn't even hint at the type of reward he would receive if he could fulfill the quest. Did this mean that it hadn't decided what he would get, or did it doubt his capability to actually survive the fight? At the same time, the conditions for completing it weren't really clear. What would happen if he was to run away? If he was knocked out, that would clearly count as surviving, right? Or did it mean that the person in front of him wanted to kill him? It's impossible for the system to know all of that. It's just a system. Whatever the case, now wasn't the time to worry about that. Seeing the baton light up, Gary was in no way inclined to allow his opponent to hit him with a weapon. He had experience being electrocuted when he was younger through an open plug, and this looked far worse, as he had discovered during his rugby training. One of the benefits of canceling the Charging Heart skill early was that the cooldown between each use would also be shortened. The downside to this was that no matter how long the skill lasted, he wouldn't get back any of his spent energy points. Gary tried to pull away, only to find himself unable to do anything. The high schooler could barely tug his arm before the strange adult had gripped onto it tightly with his giant hands. This is insane. Just how strong is this guy's grip? Gary thought. With the baton coming closer, he had no other choice but to use Charging Heart again. 61/110 energy. The last time Gary had been forced to use up so much energy was in his fight against Billy. Yanking his hand once more, the sudden spike in strength surprised the Altered Hunter, and his grip weakened for a moment. Unfortunately, the high schooler failed to completely pull away. His captor managed to grab onto Gary's other hand, this time even firmer than before, completely ignoring the teenager's boost. Even with Charging Heart, he is still just as strong. No, this guy might even be stronger. At the end of the day, these guys hunted altereds for a living, and they had to have some way to combat them. At this rate, Gary was suspecting that the Altered Hunters were altereds themselves, but what kind of hypercarry would that be? Using Gary's struggle, he threw him off balance and followed up with the electrified baton. The second it touched his stomach, Gary felt his whole body tingle all over. His green hair stood up, and all the hair all over his body. No matter how hard he tried to move, while the baton touched his body, none of his muscles were responding. It was strange that the pain was quite minimal, but he was unable to do anything. Although he saw the large fist coming toward his face, Gary was unable to block it. The great strength hurled him in the air, skidding him across the ground, and for what felt like the second time his nose was broken. You have been inflicted with a grave injury. 27 HP. 68/100 HP. Would you like to activate emergency healing? If you wish, you can set a limit as to when emergency healing will be activated. The only time he had experienced the emergency healing had been after Billy had broken his ribs by using the metal plate in his gloves. It had used energy, allowing him to heal his wounds and continue on fighting like normal. However, In this situation, Gary didn't have a high amount of energy points to use. At the same time, he didn't really need his nose to help him fight. You clearly have abnormal strength for your size. So what are you waiting for? Why don't you transform? The altered hunter asked. Wiping away the blood trickling down his nose, Gary got up again. He wasn't sure if he could win this fight or not, but he was pissed. Beyond pissed that this person had interrupted him in the middle of what he had been doing. After all, there was still another quest active that had to do with Gil. Trust me, if I knew how to transform, I would have done it by now and ripped your freaking head off. Gary charged in with this thought in his mind. He kept his eye on the baton. The second the man pressed the button on the bottom, it electrified up again. It looks like his weapon can only stay on for so long. Otherwise, he would have just kept the bloody thing electrified. Knowing this, Gary began to run in. The man confidently swung the baton towards Gary's head, this time perfectly timing his attack, but Gary had dashed forward, now running at his full speed that the charging heart skill gave him. Ducking down at the same time, it allowed the hit to go over his head. He then threw an overhead punch as hard as he could towards the man's face. Impressive. You fooled me into thinking that you were using your full speed the whole time. It's just too bad that you weren't the only one who held back, the man said as he lifted up his arm blocking the incoming punch. As it hit, Gary felt something hard, far harder than bone, and his knuckles were sore. The man seemed surprised on his end as well, about how much force the punch had behind it. Damn it! Is he wearing armor underneath his clothes, or something? God damn it, of course he is. How can an altered hunter work without that type of stuff? Jumping back, Gary was observing the situation. He was getting low on energy, yet his opponent still seemed fine, not even hurt. Gil appeared to be barely conscious, rolling about on the ground, while the abandoned gray-colored gang member seemed to be regaining consciousness, getting up on his feet. Right now, Gary was sure that there was nothing he could do against the altered hunter. He didn't like it, but he had to run. Turning away, Gary started to sprint as fast as he could. Slightly regretting not having put any points into dexterity, he was praying that the energy he still had would allow him to escape. Turning around, though, it looked like the altered hunter hadn't bothered to chase after him. Nevertheless, Gary didn't stop running, not even after he received a notification that the quest for catching Gil had failed for getting out of range. Quest failed. Eventually, Gary stopped by the convenience store. Although he had already completed his daily quest, he was in dire need of replenishing his energy. He was already feeling hunger pangs the closer he came to reaching zero energy. After spending the last of his money, Gary practically gobbled up the meat in an alley. He used some of that energy to restore his broken nose before continuing on his way. Gary made sure to go through some alleys and only returned home once he was absolutely sure that he wasn't followed. His mother had already arrived, but Gary played everything cool with his family. Judging by the fact she hadn't immediately given him a lecture, it appeared that Amy had kept her word. After spending some time with the two of them, Gary headed back to his room. His head and whole body were shaking as he sat down on the bed. That was so freaking dangerous. If that altered hunter had caught me, or if he had come in a bit later when I was weaker from fighting the others. Damn it. Gary wanted to punch something in his frustration, but before he did, he recalled what had happened to his school wall. Above all, he was most upset that he had been unable to teach Gil more of a lesson. Sure, the 50 EXP he had failed to earn had left a bitter aftertaste in his mouth, but he was now worried about what the bully would do. Without knowing why he had been punished, there was an actual risk that he might try and do something to Tom again. Gary swore that he wouldn't let that happen. Still, there was at least one piece of good news that came from the unfortunate encounter. Congratulations, you have managed to avoid getting captured by the suspected altar hunter. You've learned the importance of a strategic retreat in the face of an opponent who vastly outclasses you. Fortunately, as an apex predator, you'll be able to grow in due time. Here's something to pay him back if you ever see him again. Quest reward. Choose one skill. Chapter 54. Targeted. Tuesday morning alone proved to be a far quieter school day for XIN than Monday. A big reason for this was the absence of Gary and Tom. She didn't know why, but ever since the two friends had shown up at the karate club, the transfer girl had started to pay more attention towards them. Turning her head, she stared at their two empty seats. I heard that the green-haired boy got excluded for fighting with Steven, but what about his friend? Is it just some coincidence that he's also missing, or has he decided to skip classes so the two of them can hang out? As she wondered about the reason, she felt a certain group of girls whispering things about her, no doubt spreading some nasty rumors, as they were staring daggers at her. Right, I should probably worry about my own problems first. Why is it so hard to find that one opportunity to apologize and clear things up between us? Just when did she convince the entire class to avoid talking to me, as if had the plague? Ever since XIN had accidentally thrown Tiffany into Gary's puke, she had tried to apologize. Last week, she had failed to make any progress. The transfer girl had sincerely hoped that after the weekend, the queen bee might have forgiven her or at least shown herself more willing to listen to reason. But she had no such luck. Yesterday, Tiffany's two goons had gotten in the way each and every time, not even letting her speak with their ringleader. It had gotten to the point that the new girl had wanted to just beat them up to get through them. The only reason she hadn't done so was because XIN feared that it would only escalate her situation. When the bell signaled their lunch break, XIN planned to catch Tiffany on the way to the canteen to finally settle things between them. Following her down the hallway, though, she eventually encountered someone else who was walking through the halls with a bandage over his head. "Steven, is that you?" XIN called out to her clubmate. The karateka seemed pretty zoned out, so she wanted to make sure he was okay. "Is your head all right? I heard what happened. What made that guy attack you like that?" Based on the few interactions she had with Gary, he hadn't seemed like the type of person to just attack someone for no reason. Then again, she hadn't exactly expected to find him challenging their karate club either. Still, unlike Gary, XIN felt like she knew more about Steven and his character. It wouldn't surprise her to learn that he had felt embarrassed about the loss and had decided to fight him again, only this time without any gear on. Of course, the amount of force Gary had used was undoubtedly excessive. Steven looked at XIN for a few seconds and just brushed her off, walking past her. Although part of him knew that it wasn't her fault, another part blamed her for what he had gone through yesterday. "He can have you," Steven mumbled as he walked away. His words were annoying, and she was about to push Steven for more answers. Yet it just so happened that she saw Tiffany enter the toilet, on her own. Wait, are those other two not with her? XIN rushed to the toilet, finally getting the chance she had been waiting for. Opening the door, a trash can landed on her head. XIN didn't understand what had happened. One moment, she had followed behind her classmate. The next, she was covered from head to toe in banana peels, dirty food, and other garbage. The girl immediately took it off, throwing it to the side, only to see Tiffany pointing at her, laughing with her two friends who had already been inside. "Haha. Well, I can safely say this is far worse than you throwing me in that puke, but it's not enough. This is just the start. You humiliated me in front of everyone, so you have to pay for this." The next second, XIN picked up the trash can from the ground. Walking to one of the two goons, she swung it over her head, causing the girl to fall to the floor accidentally, bite her lip. Seeing this, the other goon stepped back and fell down on her butt. Before Tiffany could react, XIN was already heading straight for her. With her forearm, XIN pushed her back until the queen bee was against the wall, and her forearm pressed against her neck. "Enough. I have had it with you. I've been barely here for a week, and you've done nothing but torture me for something I did to you on accident." XIN shouted. "Ever since, I've been trying to apologize to you, but you've made it abundantly clear that you don't want me to. What's wrong with you? Are you on some sort of power trip or something?" It was then that XIN saw a smile on Tiffany's face, a reaction she hadn't expected. "You screwed up," Tiffany declared. "As the mayor's daughter, I bet you thought you were pretty safe. Truth be told, I actually planned to keep this between the two of us. Pay you back for another week or so before I would eventually leave you alone, but now you laid your hands on me." With this threat, XIN wanted to finish her off here. She was ready to use one of her powerful kicks, but the words of her father rang through her head, and she decided to let go, leaving the toilet. Slamming the door behind her, it had caught the attention of a few students. Another noticeable thing was the strange smell and some items that were still stuck on her clothing. Things never seem to change around here. Kai mused, walking through the hallway, staring at his phone. Frankly, he enjoyed observing his fellow students and their problems, but he had just received a text from an important person. "Thank you for helping me out the other day. I seriously don't know who would do something like this, but I'm just glad you knew the right people who could get rid of the problem. Anyway, I owe you a big favor." Inu had called him in the middle of the night to inform Kai that a human limb in the shape of an arm had been left outside his apartment. Panicked and not knowing what to do, he called Kai to see if he could do anything. To his surprise, his fellow gang member had been easily able to fix his problem with a simple phone call. The fighter hadn't asked any questions and had simply done as instructed. Just what is going on for both Gary and Inu to receive human flesh in front of their doors? This isn't something the underdogs would do. Could have been a rival gang trying to scare them? No, that doesn't make any sense. We're barely a gang, and even if those guys from Eaton High found out that we'll be fighting them in the tag team tournament, they would simply try and beat them up. Whoever did that must have wanted to leave a message to the two of them. In that case, what exactly do the two of them have in common to receive such a thing? Kai racked his brain. Waking up that Tuesday morning, Gary had expected his body to be sore from yesterday's fight against the Altered Hunter, but thanks to his now supernatural body, he felt good as new. However, he noticed something strange. For some reason, he seemed overly hungry, and this didn't seem to be his normal type of hunger that a simple breakfast would solve. What's more, he should be overly full from yesterday. Before heading back home, he had stopped by the convenience store to replenish all the energy he had used up at his fight. After that, he also had a nice dinner with his mother and sister. If anything, he should still be full, not hungry. Wondering what's wrong with him, he decided to check his system, and the first thing he noticed were a few notifications he had missed, since he had gone to bed before midnight. As the date of the full moon approaches, the power of the moon strengthens you further. Current bonus: all stats +2. Your bloodlust grows. 7 days until the next full moon. Whoa, another boost. How many more will I get? Since it's a bonus, my guess would be that after the full moon passes, the bonus stats will go away. However, what happens after that? After each full moon, there will be a new moon. If the moon is like the thing that grants a werewolf his powers, doesn't that mean I'll have to worry about getting weaker and suffer penalties? Gary thought to himself. He chose to ignore the countdown notification as it seemed impossible to turn it off. Instead, he looked over his base stats, all 3 of which displayed +2 next to them. Strength 7, +2. Dexterity 3, +2. Endurance 9, +2. It was scary to think how strong he might possibly be in a week, and when he actually transformed. Looking over his energy and health, he saw that they still didn't benefit from any bonuses, but that's when he noticed something strange. 81/110 energy. What the hell? Why is it lower than before I went to bed? Was I sleepwalking and using charging heart or something? Thankfully, the werewolf system decided to enlighten him this time and offered the following explanation. The more your bloodlust grows in tandem to the state of the moon, the more energy is required to empower you. It would be advisable to increase your energy. God damn it. Why do you tell this to me now when I no longer have any stat points? *T, I still haven't found a method on how to increase that stat naturally. Why doesn't this stupid thing have a tutorial or some help function? Who the hell designed this junk system? Gary's cursing unfortunately didn't result in anything. He didn't know whether the system felt insulted and had decided against cooperating or if it was just the way it worked. However, he had no way of finding that out. Instead, the high schooler chose to do something about the problems he could fix, albeit temporarily. I should have known that the system doesn't give me anything for free. All right, I should be able to fix this by purchasing more food to replenish the energy that way. I will also have to avoid getting into any fights and probably refrain from using charging heart during practice. Quickly getting dressed to keep up the ruse of going to school, Gary headed to the fridge. It seemed like he had only recently filled it up completely, but as he thought about it that way 1 week ago, he wasn't the only one who had access to it. So right now, it was rather empty. It had an open milk carton, some juice, eggs, butter, and jam, but he craved something else right now. Damn, I already used up the rest of my money yesterday to buy meat. So what the hell am I supposed to do now? Gary wondered. He knew that he still had his emergency fund of 500, but he was adamant in wanting to use it to help pay off some of their family's bills. Alas, if he didn't come up with a solution soon, he might have no other choice but to use it. Gary would have to come up with one on the way, though. It was already time for him to leave for school. He was thankful that his sister hadn't told his mother, and because of this he was free to do what he wished, which happened to be finding solutions to the ever-increasing amount of problems. Picking up his feet, walking around, after a couple of hours Gary had entered the high street and noticed that his energy had gone down by a bit. 78 out of 100 energy. I still have a week to go. Just how bad will it get in the future? If I get into more fights, or get called by Kai to fight, then this could end very badly. I don't want to create any more billis. Gary kicked a pebble in his way out of frustration. Following its flight path, the high schooler noticed a poster in one of the window shops. He had actually been hoping to see if there might be any odd jobs he could do, but this one caught his eye because it had certain words that stuck out to Gary. AFC Academy. Train to become the next big fighter. An altered academy that trains altered? How great would it be if I could attend something like that? It's not like I can fake it. Altered are able to transform at will. Too bad. With how much money Kirk makes, I bet I could get rid of nearly all of my problems at once. Gary began to daydream. Trying to think of something positive was a nice little escape from reality, but eventually he left the high street and started to head to the parks where there was a nice woodland area nearby. He had chosen this area for a specific reason. After entering the woods, he looked around him to see if he could spot anyone, but it didn't look like there was anyone nearby. Despite all his setbacks yesterday, his system had surprised him with one good reward at the end of the day, showing skills that are available to be unlocked at current level. Claw Drain. Hardened Will. Don't you usually get presented with a choice of 3? Whatever, I can't really complain about getting a free skill. However, this system could have at least given me a slight description. I have only the name to go off of to guess what they do. Gary had thought to himself. From the notification, he could infer that his skill choice was limited by his current level, so there was a chance that whatever he didn't choose might become available later. Claw Drain sounded like an offensive skill, whereas Hardened Will sounded like a defensive one. Seeing as Endurance was still his highest base stat, even without having put any stat points into it, he wasn't very keen on the latter. Besides, what would be the point of him being able to take a beating for a longer time? It wouldn't have changed anything in his fight yesterday. No, what he needed was some firepower. Are you sure you would like to select the skill Claw Drain? Yes/no. After selecting yes on the menu that had popped up in front of him, a certain set of information had entered his head. He knew he would just need to think of the skill name, and it would allow him to use it, but he needed to know how it worked first. Claw Drain, Level 1. Once activated, half of the damage inflicted by the user will be used to recover health. The skill will take 15 points of energy to use. The skill will last 2 seconds. This is awesome. Up until now, I could only heal passively by converting energy into health. It would have been even greater if it had some function to boost my strength, like Charging Heart, but that might have been a bit much to ask. Still, now I can actually trade blows with my opponents without having to fear hitting 0 health. The only downside seems to be the rather short duration and the energy cost. If I use Charging Heart and Claw Drain together, that's 25 points of energy, which is nearly a quarter of my overall. Looks like skills, although helpful, really have quite the burden. Gary wanted to test out his new skill, which was why he had come to the woods in the first place. The only problem was that he was now worried about his energy bar. He was already losing it passively, so was it really wise to experiment with it? On the other hand, not experiencing the skill seemed dumb as well. As he was debating whether he should or shouldn't test it out, he felt a vibration from his phone. Grabbing it from his pocket, he saw a notification about breaking news. *T. So this time a university student has been killed, and it says their body was mauled. Gary had a bad premonition that it was Billy. Putting his phone away, he was going to try and attempt to solve his energy problem, but in that moment his secret phone vibrated. There was only one number saved on it, and it was someone he didn't want to make wait, especially after he had helped him recently. Gary would need to meet up ASAP and discuss something. It's about Billy. After reading the message, Gary had worrying thoughts going through his head. Why would Kai bring up Billy now of all times? Had he somehow discovered that all of those recent murders might have been his doing? Or could he have encountered a hairy creature at night and linked the whole mess back to him? Hang on, if Kai has actually found some lead on Billy, then that would be a great thing. I might finally be able to track him down and stop him before he can do any more harm. Gary thought, pacing up and down in the woods. He looked at the clock on the phone. It was nearly lunchtime, and although he was only allowed in school for club practice, which would be at around 3 p.m., he just couldn't wait that long. Kai's message sounded pretty urgent, and if he reached out to him about Billy, then it was vitally important to hear what his upperclassman had to share. Gary decided to rush back to school, even running for it. While he was still worrying about his energy bar, this clearly took precedence, though he refrained from using charging hard, as he should still make it in time. The high schooler managed to arrive quite quickly at school. It was quiet, so the lunch bell didn't seem to have gone off yet. Given his uniform, it was unlikely that someone would report him if they saw him. Even if someone did recognize him, they would likely just think that he had been called in by Headmistress Young. After all, who would use the free holiday that was exclusion to get back to the school ground? Rushing through the gates, Gary hurried through the hallways while trying to avoid the few teachers and students who were outside. Everyone was busy with their own thing, but it couldn't hurt being cautious. Right now, he was following Kai's instructions and was heading to a certain storage room. Gary had expected that Kai would call him over to the school's roof, but with the bell ringing any moment now, there would be students who would go up to the school roof to enjoy their meal up there. Given that his upperclassmen seemed to care about secrecy in the matter concerning Billy, just added to Gary's worries. He texted Kai that he had arrived and was now pacing up and down in the small storage room. Unfortunately, he could only make 4 steps before having to turn around. This room was basically an oversized supply closet filled with cleaning supplies and piles of toilet paper. A few pacings later, the school bell had rung, and students had begun running through the halls. Yet Kai had yet to reply. There was a sudden knock on the door. Gary panicked, looking left and right, trying to search for a hiding spot, but there was nowhere to hide apart from a mop sticking out from a bucket. For once, it didn't seem like any of his werewolf powers were going to help. As it slowly opened, Gary moved behind the mop and turned around, stopping his breathing. Yeah, you might want to try that again when you don't have green hair. It sticks out like a sore thumb, and what was the point of turning around? If you can't see me, I can't see you. What are you, 5? Kai held back his laughter as he closed the door behind him. I knocked to let you know that it was me. I mean, seriously, who else could it have been? The only ones visiting this room would be either the janitor or some horny teens looking for some quiet time. Do you think either one would have knocked? Realizing how stupid he had been, Gary felt a little embarrassed about what had just happened. Standing up, he brushed off some dust from his clothes. So, how come you have mentioned Billy so suddenly? Have you seen him lately? Did he look any different? Gary asked, wanting to change the subject, hoping that Kai would soon forget his earlier actions. The upperclassman thought that it was a pretty strange question to ask off the bat, but decided to tell him the reason why he had called him in so suddenly. No, I haven't. Otherwise, I would have already reported him to the police. Anyway, just be quiet for a moment and listen to what I have to tell you. Also, try not to panic since it won't help you, and I would like you to help me figure out what to do next. Kai answered, looking into Gary's eyes. The former didn't miss that the latter was gulping just from his warning, so Kai didn't have high hopes about Gary not panicking. However, he couldn't exactly fault him for that. Gary had already tried to reach out to him about Billy, yet Kai had shot him down at the time, believing that his underclassmen had just been looking for trouble. You know about all those murders that have been happening on the news lately? Well, I'm convinced that this is Billy's doing. I mean, son goes missing after his mother and father have been found dead, yet doesn't show up despite news outlets stating that police are looking for him. Doesn't really take a genius to figure out that unless he's dead, he would be the prime suspect. Heck, I think you figured that out when you sent me that text. If you've watched the reports, you should know that the victim of one of the recent murders in our town was a high school student like us, whereas the most recent one was a university student, and wouldn't you know it, both had connections to our fugitive friend. Hearing this, Gary felt relieved. He had strongly suspected that Billy was the murderer, yet learning that his victims were people he knew meant that at least his family members were likely safe. What are the links, and how did you figure all of this stuff out? Gary asked. To be honest, that was a bit of coincidence. I was actually looking for a link between you and Inu. You remember the new guy that recently joined our gang? Kai asked and Gary just nodded. He had only seen their newest gang member once, though, so he wasn't sure what exactly kind of link they could have had. Most importantly, how did Billy fit into all of this? Or the murders, for that matter? See, turns out you weren't the only one who received a nice little gift from a secret admirer in the middle of the night. Fortunately, Inu was just as smart as you, and let me take care of that problem. As you can imagine, I have no desire to keep sending over people and taking care of such things. I did a little digging into who exactly would do such a thing. Unlike you, Inu doesn't really have any connection to the underdogs, nor does he have beef with any of the other gangs. The only thing that I could find that the two of you shared, apart from both being in the same gang now, was that both of you participated in the fighting club. You know who else was participating? That's right, Billy, and so were his two latest victims. Now, here's where things get interesting. Not only were the deceased high schooler and university student both fighters, both of them fought against Billy Buster. Now, knowing that Billy was out for revenge, it made Gary wonder a number of things. So, does that mean he's after everyone he ever fought? Gary asked. Say, how do you know their names? I don't recall the news mentioning them. Heck, didn't the family of the high schooler even request for it to be scratched from the records? Does that really matter now? Just be glad that I did find out, and that I discovered the connection. As for your first question, it's not as simple as Billy going after those he fought. Kai replied. In fact, he seems to target those he lost against. I have a feeling that the body parts that the two of you received might have come from his other two victims. I need the both of you to be careful. Heck, it might be for the best if the two of you could start hanging out and look after each other. Having Kai figure out all of this, Gary started to wonder. Was there actually a way for Billy to track him down? Gary had never found a way, but Billy had somehow found the houses of all of those he had lost to. That information had to come from somewhere. Maybe Billy hadn't found Gary's home due to being a werewolf, but had seek him out just due to this revenge. Otherwise, how would he have found Inu's home? Now Gary knew that Billy was out for more blood, and it looked as if Inu had made it on the Omega's hit list. And all of this was his fault. All of the people who had died so far were because he had bitten Billy. On top of that, if Billy could find out where he lived somehow, it certainly meant that the underdogs could. Gary hesitated a little before asking the question that was on his mind. How many people did Billy lose to? 4, including you. 2 of which are already dead, and you can pretty much guess who he had lost thrice against, right? Fu asterisk K. Learning a bit more from Kai about the other victims, it seemed like Billy had been going through his revenge list by order of those he had lost to, which in turn meant that Inu was next. From what I remember, Inu is quite the strong fighter. He might be able to handle himself in most situations, but that's with a human as his opponent, not against a werewolf. Gary thought, it's also possible that he's gotten stronger because of the moon like me. And to top that off, he's apparently killed at least 4 people if we include his parents. Yeah, there's no way Inu will survive that on his own. You're a more caring person than I thought. While that might not be the best quality for your average gang leader, for a little group, it's not exactly bad. Kai mentioned, making Gary flinch as he had completely forgotten about his role in their little gang. Anyway, I think it's for the best if you two start to hang out together. Although Billy seems to go after his victims in the order he lost against them, we have to account for the fact that you got your present before Inu. If that's something like his calling card, then he might be coming for you first, actually. Either way, there's safety in numbers, and at least you know that he's coming after you. After your practice, give Inu a call. Let me add his number to your phone. I was going to get you two to meet up with each other more often anyway. Use that time to learn how to cooperate for the next underground fight. Gary was in the middle of giving his small secret phone to Kai when he realized something. Come again? What's that about an underground fight? Gary asked. Oh yeah, I never got a chance to tell you since someone managed to get themselves excluded yesterday. This weekend, our little gang will have their gang debut, and the two of you will be entering in a tag team match against Eden High. Don't worry, it's a couple of days after that rugby match of yours. Who knows, maybe you'll see your opponents out on the field. Kai casually said as he headed for the door. SH*T, out of all things. I've barely had a single match, never mind with someone else. Heck, it was because of that stupid match in the first place that I ended up turning Billy. Wait, Gary called out, stopping Kai before he left. I wanted to ask you about something. Kai sighed as if he knew what the question would be. Let me guess, you're worried that since Billy found out where the two of you lived, then it must mean that he had somehow gotten that information, which means the underdogs might as well. You don't have to worry about that. It's in my own interest to prevent them from finding you. I've already begun looking into how he found out about you in the first place, and once I do, I will make sure to make it impossible for them to do the same. Although Gary was worried about this, it was more so about something else. At least he knew that Billy was only attacking opponents he had lost to, so maybe his family wasn't in any danger, but there was another problem. Thank you very much, but I was actually going to ask if you could spot me some money. I used up everything I've earned to help my family pay off some overdue bills, but we got some new ones coming in, so I needed some more. It won't be for long. You can just deduct it from whatever we'll earn in that tag team match. Hearing these words, Kai's hand left the handle, and a smirk appeared across his face. Borrowing money from a gang. Now that would be quite troublesome, wouldn't it? Although I would like to say yes, you're not the only one who is a bit short on cash. You see, I never really accounted for having to call for the cleaners, much less having to do it twice in a row. As you can imagine, it's not exactly cheap to get them to work without asking questions and keeping it off the record. I'm down to what I've earned by betting on you. But those are gang funds. The rest of my cash is tied in with the underdogs, so there's no way I can access it without someone getting suspicious. You wouldn't want to be borrowing money from an underdog member, now would you? That could end up being very dangerous. If you need cash that badly, try Inu. Otherwise, you will just have to make do until the tag team match. I promise then you will get a big payday, as long as you win, of course. Kai said, leaving the room before Gary could say anything else. Gary didn't have high hopes for Inu. They didn't really know each other, so why should he give him his money? Gary was the gang leader in name only, and they both knew that. Since there wasn't much for him to do, the high schooler simply decided to stay in the small storage room with his thoughts until lunch was over so no one could see him. In the end, he hadn't figured out anything at all. He had pondered over going back to the woods, but then he would just have to get back to school, which seemed like a waste of time and probably energy. As such, Gary decided to just wait out the last 2 hours before club practice started. The bond mark on Tom was barely visible today, indicating that his best friend was far away, most likely still in the hospital. Gary couldn't imagine how worried his parents must have been after being notified that their boy had been assaulted to that degree. Then there was Gil. The mark from their force bond was also very weak, so it seemed as if he hadn't attended school as well. If he were to wager a guess, the bully was also in a hospital, though Gary hoped it wasn't the same one as Tom's. Gary didn't want to see his face so soon again anyway. The only one whose mist had been very noticeable ever since he had entered the school ground was Barry's. Gary knew that he had been there when Tom had been bullied, so he intended to pay him back. Eventually, it was time for rugby practice. Gary turned up, and people were actually pleased to see him, most noticeably Mr. Root and Blake. The latter came up to Gary and gave him a friendly shake and a pull-in. It was something that Gary had only seen people who were very close with each other. It wasn't quite a shake, nor was a hug at the same time. To say the least, Gary found it a little awkward. What was that? Gary asked. The two of us went through that crap with Eaton High together, and honestly, I've been thinking about that day for a while now. Without you, I could have seriously gotten hurt. It might have even ruined my entire rugby career. And I see you're getting better at rugby by the day. I think it will be good if the two of us stay close together. Before, when interacting with Blake, Gary had shrugged him off, and he was only starting to realize now was because he had been jealous. With how perfect Blake was, it had only highlighted how imperfect Gary had been. However, now that those on the rugby team had started to accept him, he was realizing that Blake was just a nice guy. Not everyone was happy to see Gary, though. When he saw him and Blake exchange their greeting, Barry's eyebrows furrowed. The strange thing was that Gary seemed to notice it and turned his head around, though Barry looked away, as if avoiding the death stare. Are any of the team members still causing you problems? Blake asked, noting the change in Gary's mood. For a second, he considered whether confiding in the helpful athlete, but ultimately decided against it. Even if Blake had some power to punish the duo who had done that to Tom, most likely by getting them kicked off the team, that wouldn't satisfy the anger that was inside of Gary. Thanks for the offer, but it's okay. It's nothing that I can't deal with. Gary shook his head, walking past Blake, not even looking at him again, but just staring at one person. Rugby practice that day was probably the worst performance Gary had ever put on since he had become a werewolf. The main reason for that was his energy problem. With no reliable way to replenish it, he hadn't used charging hard even once, and he was trying to conserve his energy as best as he could, which translated poorly for his team. He might have gotten into trouble, but as it turned out, he wasn't the only one who was performing subpar. Barry had messed up catching the ball as it was thrown to him a couple of times in a pass, fumbling and allowing it to fall to the ground. After yelling at them all a couple of times, Mr. Root decided to call off the practice early today in hopes that maybe some rest would do them some good. He hoped that by that time Gil might be back as well. As the others left the field, Gary turned around to stare at Barry again, causing him to flinch. Damn it, I can't concentrate on the practice match at all today, and it's all because of him. Gil, he was in the hospital and he was badly beaten. I can't prove it, but it just has to have been him. He might not look that part, but after what he did to Steven, it's clear that he's hiding a few things. I knew we shouldn't have messed with his friend, and look what's happened now. The way he's looking at me, I just know he's going to come after me next. Barry thought. Eventually, everyone ended up going to the locker room, and were happily getting changed, but for Barry, he had yet to open his locker to change out of his rugby uniform. His hand went to open it, but it was visibly shaking. That stare, I can tell he's going to kill me. If it wasn't for the guy saving Gil from his assailant, Gary would have surely killed him. I can't let it end like that, Barry thought, as he opened up the locker, and inside there was a 4-inch kitchen knife he had brought with him from home. He can't kill me if he's dead. Gary had left as soon as rugby practice was over, following an unexpected message on his secret phone from an unknown number. Given the content of the message, it wasn't hard to figure out who it was, though. Kai gave me this number and told me to text you. He told me that the two of you have already talked about our little Billy situation and our upcoming tag team match. I'll be waiting here. The sender had attached his location on the map, marking his position. Honestly, Gary wasn't looking forward to meeting Inu so soon, mainly because the high schooler figured that the other would want to either have a sparring match or just train together. Until he had a way to solve his energy problem, neither option seemed like a good idea. 52/110 energy. His energy points were going down far faster than he had expected, even though he hadn't felt like he had actually done much during rugby practice. It seemed as if just staying awake was taking up energy today. The primary reason why Gary had decided to meet up with Inu was in hopes of solving this very same problem. He intended to follow Kai's suggestion and ask his fellow gang member to borrow some money. Arriving at the location, Gary was surprised to see that it was quite a nice-looking park. There was a large open green field where people were playing football, a set of swings, and some families. It was halfway between Gary's school and Inu's school. I don't even know what gang runs this part of SLU. Although the underdogs have most of the SLU under their thumb, they don't own all of it. This place is so peaceful, Gary thought, which was why he was wondering why Inu had asked him to meet up in such a place. Over here, Inu shouted, waving with one hand in his pocket. The first thing Gary noticed was that both of the fighters' hands were still bandaged up. He looked almost exactly the same as when Gary had first seen him in the arena. The only difference was that he was wearing familiar-looking clothes. It took him a moment to recognize them as the gang uniform that Kai had prepared for them. What gives? Here I do my best to make myself presentable by wearing our gang outfit. Yet our mighty leader isn't wearing the clothes himself. Gary wasn't sure whether Inu sounded more annoyed or embarrassed about the fact that he was the only one who seemed to have put some thought into this meeting. Sorry? I didn't really consider this like a gang meeting, and I also just came out of school. Besides, is it really wise to wear our colors so openly? Isn't this like sending a challenge to all the other gangs? Gary asked. At this point, Inu couldn't hold it in any longer and let out a big sigh. Someone who was in a gang wasn't supposed to act like that in front of their leader. But the more he interacted with Gary, the more he was convinced that Kai must seriously be pulling his leg about who the actual leader of their gang was. As long as the big gangs don't know who we are and who is supporting us, they won't be messing with us. They just don't roll that way. Why do you think so many color gangs are able to roam around freely sprouting their colors? Unless it gets pretty serious, those behind them don't usually get involved. Secondly, brandishing your colors is the whole point. A gang isn't meant to show any fear or back down from those around them. If you're serious about starting this gang stuff, then you need to do it right. Gary wanted to stop into there. This whole creating a gang business had never been his idea in the first place. However, explaining to the other that Kai had practically forced him to act as their leader didn't really seem like it would be possible or actually help in this situation. Inu had already gotten in a fighting stance, pointing for Gary to go opposite him in the large grass field. They weren't even too far away from where the kids were, so the parents were able to easily see them. Really here? Gary questioned. Well, for what I've heard, it's not like we have a hideout yet. So yes, here. Don't tell me you're shy, Green Fawn. When I fight, I always intend to win. You're my partner, so I need to see what you got. Inu explained and straight away threw out a kick. Out of reflex, Gary tried to evade it, but he was too slow and, as such, was only able to partially block the attack. As soon as it hit, though, he realized how heavy the hit was and just how powerful the strike was. -5 HP. Damn, that hurt, and it didn't feel like he was serious yet. *T. If I keep losing health, then my energy will be used up to heal me once I'm idle, which will just worsen my situation. Ina didn't give Gary much time to think, and just kept on attacking. His opponent couldn't do much, but try his best to evade and block, but it was near impossible for him to counter, given his passive fighting style. Thanks to the buff the moon provided him, Gary's speed was faster than usual, but it was a far cry from him using Charging Heart. After some more of what could only be called a one-sided bullying, Inu called off the fight. Gary was very thankful for that, since he was left with merely 31 points of energy and the pangs in his stomach were getting stronger. What's wrong with you? You seem distracted and a little weak. Inu asked, Are you that worried about that whole Billy situation? Gary shook his head. No, it's just that I'm exhausted. As I told you, I just came from rugby practice, and these days I can't really afford to eat anything decent. Actually, I was hoping you could dash. I can't. Inu replied straight away, not even letting Gary finish his sentence. Finance-wise, I'm not exactly in the best situation myself. Otherwise, I would have never ended up joining your gang. If you're really hungry, you'll figure something out. I had to do the same. Whether you need to hunt for food yourself, steal, or what, a really hungry person will find a way. All right, that might explain the lack of energy, but not you being distracted. Look, I know Kai said the two of us should look out for each other, but honestly, you just need to look out for yourself. You don't need to worry about me, that I also don't have time to babysit you either. Heck, I beat the guy 3 times already, and now that I know that he might be after me, I won't mind beating him a 4th time. Maybe I'll even get some sort of reward if I can hand him over to the police. Gary wanted to say that Billy had changed since then, but there was no way that Inu would believe him if he started talking about werewolves. He would probably consider him to be crazy on top of being an incompetent leader and fighter. Anyway, that was my pep talk. We can meet up and train here before the match. When you have more energy, I'll show you a few things you might know about fighting, but you don't know how to fight. Inu said and got ready to leave. Next time, make sure to have more energy. Also, come in uniform, so I won't look like an idiot. Wait, Gary called out. If something happens, if you happen to see Billy, or if you think he's somewhere near you, promise you'll text or call me. I'll be there straight away. I already told you, there's no dash. Please, just tell me. Gary insisted. Ina looked into Gary's eyes. He didn't know why it was so important for his leader, but there was more fire in his eyes when he made his request than the whole time the two of them had been fighting. Sure, whatever. Inu shrugged and waved him goodbye as he walked off. 30/110 energy. Your energy is now extremely low. In order to conserve energy, marks will no longer be visible. Huh, wait, that was an option. Couldn't you have told me about that earlier? Gary felt a migraine coming up due to the system's seeming antics. Well, it's as if knowing that would have solved the issue anyway. Looks like I have no choice now. I'm going to have to use the secret stash. I've never felt this pain before. The mist from the marks that would usually hover around in the air had disappeared. The only good thing was that the energy was now decreasing at a seemingly lower rate. It seemed like nearly everything the werewolf body did required energy. Gary thought about how much meat he had already eaten since he had become a werewolf, and more importantly, how much money it had cost him. He shook his head to think about something else. Gary passed by his school and headed home. The more he thought about food, the hungrier he was getting. Is this hunger, or is my eyesight worsening as well? No, my sense of smell is also. Could it be that I'm becoming more regular? Gary realized his situation. He checked his menu. While his energy points were low, his stats remained unchanged, which was a good thing to find out. While walking down the street, Gary was pondering whether he should stop by the gym after replenishing his energy. He had missed yesterday's session, and now that he had increased his base strength, he was sure he would have to train even more if he wanted to further raise it. Although his hearing had also suffered, he noticed the sound of someone coming up from behind. Gary didn't think anything of that. It was still the middle of the day, and he was on a public street. At most, he thought that he might have dallied around too long, and someone wanted past him. Gary turned around to let whoever it was pass him, but in that moment, he recognized the guy behind him. "Barry," he called out in surprise. The next second, Barry had closed the distance between the two. Suddenly, Gary felt a familiar type of pain. It was a dull ache that continued to worsen, and a warm liquid trickled down his leg. "You have been stabbed. You have been stabbed." 30 HP. 70/100 HP. While your energy is extremely low, emergency healing function is unavailable. You are bleeding. Your health will decrease by 4 HP per minute until you're patched up or healed. Gary didn't need the system to figure out that he had been stabbed. It was a memory that he would probably never be able to forget. The really worrying part were the messages following it. Unless Gary could somehow replenish his energy to have his system automatically heal the wound, or at least bandage it, he would bleed out and die. "Barry, you damn bastard. Where the hell did you come from, and why did you stab me? First you hurt Tom, and then you do this. I should just..." Gritting his teeth, his bloodlust was leading him to only one logical conclusion. "I should just kill you." Barry looked up, yet rather than seeing a scared expression on his victim's face, Gary was the picture of pure, unbridled anger. He had expected him to be either screaming, scared, or in shock, but instead his schoolmate seemed ready to take him along to the next world. Instinctively, Barry stepped away from him. His hand, which had still been on the knife handle, ended up pulling the weapon out. He had never stabbed anyone before, so he himself was still in shock at what he had done. "I'm sorry, but I don't want to die," Barry cried out, attempting to stab Gary one more time. However, Gary stood there, already waiting for the other's attack. "Screw you," he thought as he activated Charging Heart. 18 of 110 energy. Showing no hesitation, he grabbed the knife before it could stab him again. Gary held it in place with his strength, even though his hand was now cut. -5 HP. 65/100 HP. A deep cut has appeared on your hand. -5 HP. Your blood loss quickens. 2 HP. 63/100 HP. What kind of psycho is he? How could someone just grab onto a knife like that? How isn't he hurt or scared from all that bleeding? "You're a monster," Barry eventually blurted out. Not wasting time on talking back to his assailant, Gary swung his hand out. It was too fast for Barry to even see as Gary hadn't held back. His strike connected to the right side of his head, close to his temple. His whole body turned, and he nearly fell over. Lacking the power, he let go of the knife in his hand, and Gary kicked the knife down the alleyway, before kicking the bully in the same direction. "Why did I even try? Why did I even think about getting that marking off?" Gary muttered, yet it seemed more as if he was speaking to himself than to him. He knelt down and punched Barry in the head once more, leaving the larger teenager dazed. Gary's punches were harder than anything he had ever received, even though the bully had actually seen and had his fair share of fights. Barry soon felt his body being dragged deeper into the alleyway, being pulled by the hoodie he had worn to not get recognized immediately by passerby. He didn't know why the other was doing that, but whatever his reasoning was, it couldn't be good for him. Desperate to get out of this situation, Barry looked for anything that might help. He managed to find a brick on the ground and quickly picked it up. Gary was still busy dragging him along, so he was surprised when the other suddenly jumped off the ground and smashed him in the head with a brick. Dash 10 HP. 51/100 HP. Your skull is partially fractured. Congratulations. After repeatedly taking a beating, your body has grown stronger. Don't get used to this, though. You might lose some brain cells. Endurance +1. Chapter 41. Omega Beta Alpha. Perhaps it had been because of how tired Gary had been throughout Friday, or it might have had something to do with him having gone to sleep before midnight when he would get new notification, but this morning he woke up well rested. The absence of the annoying alarm that usually woke him up long before his sister Amy certainly also had a part to play in that. Stretching, Gary checked his status, already expecting to see some changes. Unsurprisingly, his daily quests had once again refreshed, but there was also a new notification waiting for him. Your bloodlust grows. 10 days until the next full moon. Unlike yesterday, there were no mentions of any additional stats due to it being closer to the full moon, though. After looking at his phone, he realized that it was already 11 a.m., meaning that he only had 1 hour before meeting up with Tom. Holy crap, I slept in this late. Gary cursed internally, getting dressed as quickly as possible before leaving the apartment. 30 seconds later, he returned, making sure to bring along Kai's phone as well this time. Heading to the town center where the library was located, Gary decided to run there. This method didn't use up any money, and he found it to be a good way to check whether he might actually increase his energy bar this way. Energy and health were both stats under the werewolf system, so if he could naturally improve strength and endurance, why not those two? It was at least worth a shot, although it was mostly about saving money. The library was a 3-story building and had been built at the edge of the shopping street, at the end of all the shops. It was primarily used by university students who actually had a hopeful future ahead of them. It was one of the few safe areas of town where the police regularly patrolled, which was why gangs left it untouched. The gangs, in the first place, during the day, didn't interfere much with the general business that would operate in the high street. Gary's powerful eyesight allowed him to see Tom already waiting for him, but from a distance he could also see that something was wrong with his friend. Slowing down his stride, his happy face quickly turned sour. "What happened to you?" Gary asked. Tom put on a smile and touched his swollen and cut eye. Man, I was watching one of Kirk's altered fights, and then as I went out of my room, I wanted to try out his tornado kick. Stupid me, I fell down the stairs and banged up my eye on the banister pretty badly. Although a fall down the stairs might explain some of it, Tom also had other markings on his body. Ignoring Tom's dislike for most physical activities, falling down the stairs was pretty much the textbook answer someone gave when trying to hide something. Could it be trouble at home? No, his parents aren't like that. They treasure their golden boy too much to hurt him. Gary thought. He knew that something was up, but Tom's behavior made it clear he didn't exactly want to talk about it. Given how many secrets of his own Gary was keeping from his best friend, he didn't feel it was right for him to push him on the matter. "So what move was it again?" Gary asked, pretending to accept the explanation he had been presented, as they both entered the library together. As with any library, it was very quiet, so they kept their mouths shut until reaching the 3rd floor where they could access the public computers. Tom searched up all the relevant books in the library that they might need. Using the internet, he just looked up the pages and information they actually needed. Tom was reading through them all and writing down notes that Gary didn't quite understand. So for now, he was just being used as a delivery boy. Whenever Tom would find a book they thought that could be of use, Gary would be asked to go get it, constantly going back and forth between, until finally, clicking his fingers and rubbing his good eye, Tom was satisfied with the research he had done. "All right, I believe I have learned everything there is to know about Alpha, Beta, and Omega wolves," Tom claimed, folding his arms proud. "Let's start with what applies with actual wolves. According to the lore I found, it should more or less coincide. Still, take all of this information with a pinch of salt." Tom flipped the notepad he had brought with him and opened a blank page. He then pulled out a marker pen and wrote the word Alpha. While explaining, he would write out the points and explain everything to Gary. Wolves are creatures that often hunt in packs, so every pack has their leader. These are the so-called alphas. A wolf pack usually has an alpha male and his alpha partner. These two could be seen as the family leaders. Beta wolves are pretty much wolves that are under the alpha. They could be their siblings, their children, or even outsiders. However, they all belong to a pack, following the alpha or alphas. Are you following so far? Tom asked, and Gary nodded. Okay, I get those too. But if an alpha is like the leader of a gang, and the betas are like his henchmen and subordinates, then what exactly is an omega? Gary asked. His optional quest told Gary to turn an omega wolf into a beta, but this was where his confusion was setting in. Assuming he himself was the alpha wolf, was it referring to his siblings like Amy, or maybe his mother was the alpha wolf, and he and his sisters were considered betas? This is where things get a little interesting. Tom answered, flipping his notebook to a blank page once again. An omega wolf is usually an outsider to a family or someone belonging to no family. Either way, they're usually at the bottom of the hierarchy. Essentially, after everyone else has gotten their food, the omega has to eat whatever is left. So far, if Gary was being classified as werewolf in these terms, he wasn't sure what he was. I know you were talking about wolves, but werewolves are part human, right? So how does this work? There are quite a few rules here, and it gets a bit complicated, but essentially a werewolf can turn another with a bite. Alpha wolves bite and turn those they wish to work under them, thereby creating beta wolves. Once turned, the beta wolves can also turn others, making them into other beta wolves that will have to listen to the alpha, to an extent I should add, but let's keep it simple for now. Hearing this, a shaking realization came to Gary's mind. A bite can turn someone... No, when the system message came up saying, I made an omega wolf. Images flashed in Gary's head to the time he had lost it slightly. At one point during his fight against Billy Buster, his sanity had left him and he had only wanted to win by all means. As he recalled, he had ended up biting the guy. Yesterday, the news reported Billy was on the run and his parents were dead. Don't tell me, was I responsible for this by fighting him? Is he really a werewolf now? Wait, you said that if an alpha bites someone, they would turn them into a beta, that they would have to follow them. So what about an omega? Gary asked, realizing that something was strange about the wording of the quest. As for an omega wolf, in most cases they seem to be wolves who have been kicked out of pack. However, that doesn't always have to be the case. For instance, they could also be the only surviving wolf of a group. In a way, you could say that alpha and beta wolves are just omega wolves who belong to a pack and have a hierarchy amongst themselves. I suppose it doesn't have to be rats necessarily. It should also work with other things, right? If I can keep up my energy without having to spend money, and if it stops me from... Gary didn't want to finish that thought. He changed into his rugby uniform for now, placing the bloody clothes in his bag, and headed home. The high schooler decided against going to the gym for now, and he wasn't sure he would go there after having dropped off his bag at home. The good news was that Gary had not only replenished his energy, but that he had essentially solved his problem on how to get a free supply. At least for the coming days, he could test out his new skill and more, but there was still the problem with Barry. Will he tell anything to the cops? I mean, he was the one who stabbed me. Everything I did was pretty much just self-defense. If he tells the truth, he will just get in trouble as well. After getting home, speaking to his mother and sister, it was this thought that was making it hard for him to fall asleep. Eventually, he saw a familiar message as the clock hit midnight. Your bloodlust grows. 6 days until the next full moon. Earlier in the day, Anton Milston had stayed behind to investigate the crime scene. More police had arrived to help him while the ambulance had given the injured high schooler some treatment before taking him to the hospital. After reporting what he himself had witnessed, the chief of police had left his subordinates to gather any clues, while he himself had decided to go to the hospital, hoping to talk to the victim. Despite it being dark outside, he continued to wait for the boy to wake up. While in the hallway, a young police officer named Rugame walked up to Anton with a few files in his hand, but he had a worried look on his face as he approached. Just tell me what it is. Anton sighed and waved to Rue to hurry up. Yes, sir. Unfortunately, it seems like we will have to hand over the case to White Rose. We tested the weapon that was found at the scene for fingerprints. It appears that the one we have apprehended isn't the victim, but actually the assailant. However, we have also found the blood of what we can only assume to be the actual victim. The blood splat report states that our injured friend most likely stabbed the one you have scared away. Now here's where things get interesting. While we don't have that mysterious person's identity in the database, we do have this blood on record. You remember the gang members that we found at the construction site? Well, the blood matches up. Whoever that person is, he was at the construction site on that day. Anton let out an even bigger sigh because he now understood why White Rose would grab this case. If the blood matched up, it was most likely the same altered who had killed the gang members that had attacked the high schooler. What about Billy Brunnan? He was a high school student, and his last two victims were teenagers. Is there any possible link to him? Anton asked. Not that we are aware of. We have Billy's suspected DNA on file that we recovered from his home. White Rose has made a forensics check, but his DNA wasn't the one found at the construction site, nor anyway near the alleyway or the other cases. It seems these are two separate altered killing cases. Shaking his head, Anton was wondering what the world was coming to. Thanks, Rookie. Report this to White Rose, and while you're at it, try to look for some links between the two. I know that there hasn't been anything so far, but the fact that these are both high school students and have run-in with suspected altereds, I just have a feeling this whole thing is connected. It was then that the sound of panic was heard not too far from where they were. The nurse came storming out of the room and quickly brought a doctor back with her. Even more panic started to ensue, and they were wondering just what was going on. Inside the hospital room itself, Barry was shaking. His whole body seemed to be undergoing some type of fit, and he had foam in front of his mouth. Not too long after, a certain someone received a notification screen. Congratulations, you have successfully hunted your first marked. Reward, additional stat points.